Mr. Chairman, we are live.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to the committee. We will go right into our standard announcements, which is the meeting protocols, which I think everybody knows how they work at this point in time. We've done enough. And we'll go straight to roll call. And when you do present or otherwise, let us know if you're in Hot Springs or if you are at home, I think, so everybody knows who's here.
Senator Anselmi Dalton.
Mr. Chairman, she just got admitted from the waiting room.
Present from Rock Springs. And
Senator James.
Here from Hot Springs.
Senator Moniz.
Here.
Senator Wassberger.
excused, he said he was going to be a bit late.
Representative Edwards.
Here. Not from here.
Representative Edwards.
Here.
Representative Flitner.
Here.
Representative Freeman.
Sounds up.
Representative Haley.
Here.
Representative Newsom.
Here.
Representative Tass.
Here in Hot Springs.
Representative Winter.
Here in Thermopolis.
Representative Yin.
Here remotely.
Co-Chairman Driscoll.
Here, Thermopolis.
Co-Chairman Miller.
Here in Thermopolis.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm here, Senator Anselmi Dalton in Scugata County. Sorry for being late getting in.
Welcome. Our first topic is Wyoming Game and Fish Department. The topics will be the authority to allow for continued hunting and fishing during public health authorities, overview of warden housing, domestic sheep conflicts in the state, and public comment. Do we have game and fish in the waiting room?
Mr. Chairman, we have Rebecca Fitzgerald in the waiting room, and then I don't know who's in person in Thermopolis.
No one in person, I don't believe, in Thermop, but we'll have Rebecca present to us, please.
Mr. Chairman, Director Nesbitt's trying to get accepted into the meeting. He asked me.
Apparently we have Director Nesbitt trying to get in as well.
Yes, sir. I'm on now.
Okay.
Welcome, Director Nesbitt.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
The floor is yours and let you proceed on.
Okay, well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. Brian Nesvik, Director of Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And I thought I'd start, Mr. Chairman, I've seen the items on your agenda. I thought I'd start maybe with a lightning round of just very quick agency updates on things that I know the committee's been interested in the past and some kind of recent happenings with regard to wildlife, if that's your pleasure.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, I'll start on a disappointing note, Mr. Chairman. I think I sent the committee last week a court decision that certainly did not go in the way that the state of Wyoming hoped it would go with regards to the grizzly bear. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the lower court's decision, which essentially found that the delisting rule that returned grizzly bear management back to the state of Wyoming, it upheld the lower court's decision to deny that, or to finding that the service failed to do everything that they needed to do with regards to genetic connectivity, analysis of what's called the remnant population, and then also this whole very complex issue called recalibration. Bottom line for us, we're very disappointed in that decision. This bear population is fully recovered, has been for over a decade, and it's recovered due in large part to the efforts of the state of Wyoming and the citizens of our state. So we're continuing to evaluate that decision, and the governor and the attorney general and the Game and Fish Commission are all strategizing on what our next steps may or may not be. Next, quick update, Mr. Chairman. This relates directly to our budget and our response to the current situation we have in our state. I think, as most of the members know, irregardless of what we do with our budget, it doesn't have any effect on the general fund. However, in anticipation of those things that unpredictable and may be, unexpected events in the future with regards to our revenues, we are making some reductions in our budget, both as a matter of just good business practice and also in recognition of those uncertainties that we now face. We're looking at, we'll be proposing to our commission today 5 to 7% cuts to our standard budget, and then as much as 15 to 20% cuts to our one-time budget. Along budgetary lines, I've updated this committee for over a year now on our needs and also our movement and progress forward with constructing a new office in the Cody region, a new regional office. We continue to move forward with that project. The money was allocated some time ago, and we've worked with architects. We're now looking at a potential start date here in the coming spring for construction of that office. We've involved some of the members of this committee, local legislators, as well as the community county commission. Basically anybody who's interested, our constituents as well, adjacent landowners, folks in the Cody and the Bighorn Basin area in this project to keep them updated on what we're doing. Next item, Mr. Chairman, trapping has been something that I know many of you have received some comments from members of the public on. Our commission has as well. And in fact, our commission received a petition here several months ago requesting the commission to take immediate action to implement several regulations related to trapping, specifically implementing trap-free zones and looking at methods and techniques that are authorized by current state statute and regulation with regards to how trapping is conducted in the state. The commission heard the much public comment from both the petitioners and other members of the public, both in support of the petition as well as those that were opposed. The commission elected not to take immediate action at that time, but they did give the department direction to move forward with studying the issue, considering multiple aspects. They gave the department a long laundry list of different considerations that they wanted us to take a look at. We're evaluating those now, and we will be reporting today or either today or tomorrow. We'll be updating the commission on our progress on that. The commission won't be taking any action on that, but we will update them on our progress, and we will be coming back to the commission here in the next several months with recommendations on whether they should or should not take up a new regulation to make some changes to existing trapping laws. The committee has certainly been interested in what happened this last winter with regards to mountain goats in Grand Teton National Park and the decisions by the Park Service to remove some goats via aerial gunning. As you're all aware, we reached out to them and expressed our extreme disappointment and disagreement with that decision. Since then, the Park Service has worked with the department and other stakeholders, and they are in the process of a draft plan to use qualified volunteers this fall to do the same removal of mountain goats. Qualified volunteers meaning members of the public that meet certain qualifications that would come into the park and remove those goats, similar to a hunting season. There's going to be more details, I think, to follow on that this coming week, and I will be meeting again with the superintendent of the park tomorrow morning. Lastly, on quick updates, Mr. Chairman, I always like to keep the committee apprised based on your request of new regulations that the commission has passed since we last talked. In April, the commission approved all of the hunting regulations for this coming season. And then in June, there was a special meeting held that was consequential to legislation that you all were part of passing this past session that required the commission to promulgate rules prior to July 1. One of those rules is directly related to the bill that you all passed regarding wild bison licenses and how those are allocated. And then secondly, the commission promulgated regulations regarding the public records statute that you passed that gives the department the ability to protect individual identifications of those who take wildlife legally in our state. Both of those regulations passed in late June and are awaiting the governor's signature now. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stop quickly and ask if there's questions on any of my very brief agency updates.
Questions of the committee? And I can't see anybody, so you can unmute yourself. Senator James, I can see you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious why we're paying attention to the 9th Circuit Court when they're not overwhelming and we don't go through the 10th Circuit Court regarding the grizzly bear.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James. So we're bound by any appellant court in the land, and the way that works is that the plaintiffs are able to select the particular district court that they want to take their case to. In this case, they took it to a Montana district court. They can find standing for a lot of different reasons. They found standing there because Montana has a portion of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem grizzly bear population. And certainly the state has been more interested in having it in the 10th Circuit, but that's not the way that it's been, that's not the way that those cases have been allocated in the past.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator James, any further questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Flitner.
Representative Flintner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Nesbitt, I do have a couple questions. The first is regarding the 9th Circuit decision and—
We're getting no audio from Representative Flintner. I don't believe anyone else hear.
I can hear. Can you not hear me?
Yeah, I can hear, Mr. Chairman.
I was just wondering. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Nesbitt, what is the cost to the state of Wyoming? And does the federal government bear any of the cost of grizzly management?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flitner. So right now, the state of Wyoming on the entire grizzly bear program in our state spends over $2 million a year. The federal government applies what they call or allocates and grants to the state on an annual basis what they call Section 6 money, but it's a small amount of money. It's typically less than $100,000 a year of that total $2 million bill. I will say that a lot of that, over half of that $2 million that we spend is directly related to conflict. So compensating livestock owners for losses due to grizzly bear depredations and solving conflicts between people and grizzly bears. And then the remainder outside of those damage payments and that conflict work is related to our actual collection of data and doing on the ground management of grizzly bears. Over the life of our involvement in grizzly bear management, dating back to the 80s, as long as we've kept decent records on this, the state of Wyoming spent over $50 million to recover the grizzly bear.
Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Continue.
Thank you. And Director Nesbitt, do we have any recourse with regard to that when they implement this decision and level this on our state? Is there any way we can push back with regard to those management costs?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flitner, there are, and while I don't want to talk about specific legal strategies in this format or in this forum, there are some potentials. The state in the past has always taken advantage of any ways we have to appeal or to push back, and we will continue to do that this time as well. I just don't know in what manner we're planning to do that yet. That's still undecided.
And another follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
And thank you, Director Nesbitt. And I just was wondering too, then, with regard to data and analysis of the data, if I understand it correctly, the reason that they continue to push back on our belief that those numbers are such that they can be delisted, if they're not accepting your data and your analysis of that data, how involved is U.S. Fish and Wildlife? It just seems like we're never going to get out of this predicament that we're in. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flitner, first of all, say I very much share your frustration. And the one thing that is not really contested by most folks involved in this, and that is that grizzly bears are recovered. Our data has been accepted. The common accepted science, and even acknowledgement by the courts, is that this population is recovered. The challenge is in overcoming what I would just classify as technicalities in the process that the federal government uses to move from federal management to state management. And that is the real challenge. And you're right, a lot of the manner in which that's been done in the past by the federal government, we find as part of the reasons that it wasn't successful. And so when we talk about our strategy going forward, we're going to have to look at a different way to approach that, because what we're doing right now isn't working. And we've been dealing with these, the first time grizzly bears were proposed for delisting was in 2007. And so we've been dealing with this for 13 years now, and had management return to the state on 2 different occasions now, and then had it withdrawn again. I do know that, from the perspective of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, they have, made attempts to try to find a delisting rule that they feel will be durable in the courts. But bottom line is that hasn't been the case. That hasn't been what the result has been after we've gone to court. So all of that will be, in consideration when we decide how we're going to move forward in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Director. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions from the committee? Co-Chairman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Director Nesbitt, what would happen if Wyoming decided to go ahead and have a grizzly hunt anyway, say by governor's executive order or however we can do it? What would you see playing out if Wyoming did that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, so I'm going to speculate, and please accept it as making some assumptions and speculating. I suspect, because of the nature of this issue and how contentious it is, that we would subject those people who participated in that hunt to federal prosecution. And so our take to this point is that we don't ever want to put our citizens in that particular situation where they could be federally prosecuted. And so that, that's what I think would happen if we enacted our own season without having federal law on our side.
Follow up? No. Very good. Further questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead. Representative Freeman.
I feel for you on the grizzly bear issue. If you could relay some of the things on the trapping. I've been caught twice in a snare trap walking my dog, and I'm deathly afraid that my dog is going to get in something like that. So I like the idea of there being some sort of posting that there's trapping going on in an area. So as you proceed with the trapping review, I hope you consider that kind of information to the public.
Yeah, Mr. Representative Freeman, I'll just reply by saying that is certainly one of the things that will be considered by the department and the commission.
Follow up? Further questions from the committee? Okay, I have one, Director Nesbitt. you're talking about the 5 to 7% cuts and the other cuts you're doing. Being you guys are off general fund, where does that money go when you make a cut?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. So that money remains in our Game and Fish General Fund, our operating fund. The commission within that fund has basically 3 different pots of money. They have or actually 4. They have an operating reserve, which is it's kind of like the state's rainy day fund, where they put 7 months worth of operating funds aside and say, we want to have this here in case whatever happens to our revenue stream happens, we can keep the lights on for 7 months. They have another pot for already allocated money, like to the Cody office project. And then they have a pot of discretionary money that they can save or use for one-time projects that may come up. For example, if the commission recently allocated money to a wildlife highway crossing project in Kemmer, that came from that operating reserve that they maintain. Right now, that operating reserve is around 12 million. And then the other account is just the normal everyday, our checking account, basically the operating fund. So that money would revert back to that operating reserve. And again, without the ability to necessarily shape and influence exactly how and when our revenues may increase, this is a hedge against unpredicted future circumstances. It's to make sure that if we do have decline in revenues for whatever reason, I think none of us would predict we would be in the situation we are right now 6 months ago, that we have the ability to continue to provide services to the state of Wyoming and be responsible to our stakeholders.
Perfect. I appreciate it. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't running general fund or whatever. Also, what are your revenue streams looking like at this point? Are they staying stable for you?
Mr. Chairman, they have remained stable. We have received some early indications that, similar to what happened early on in the Obama administration, where the increases in ammunition and gun sales put more money into all of the states through Pittman-Robertson. We have some early indications that that's happening again. But those revenue streams, if they do increase, we won't actually realize that for 2 to 3 years.
Very good. Thank you. If we got Co-Chairman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Director, what would be the total sum of all the dollars in savings, reserves, similar to all the coffee cans the legislature has set aside? Are we talking a year's worth of funding, or 6 months, or 1 month? Do you have a dollar amount that looks at the total of all those different funds?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, absolutely. So the total amount is not an annual budget, but it's close. We're talking, I don't have the specific number here today, but I'm going to give you a range. It's 50 to 60 million. When you consider what we have in the checking account, what we have to make sure we have 7 months worth of operating funds, and then what we have in those funds that are allocated for projects that we've already approved, but we haven't spent the money yet, that total is around 50 to 60 million.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. And your annual budget is something on the order of 60 million?
83 million, Mr.
83, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Continue on, Director Nesvik.
Mr. Chairman, I do see Senator James's hand is raised.
Sorry, Senator James, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Speaking of Pittman-Robertson, how's that divided up, and is some of that being dispersed towards hunter education and maintenance of gun ranges and helping with those and helping build those up and that type of thing? Or is it going directly towards conservation, or how's that being dispersed?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, so there's since it's a federal grant, there are specific requirements. We have to spend the money on conservation, hunter education, and now gun ranges. All those things qualify. So the answer to your question shortly is yes, we are using Pittman-Robertson for those kind of activities. Obviously, to a much, much higher level for wildlife conservation, wildlife management purposes than it is for like hunter education. So those activities that the department engages in on a daily basis, when we go up and we go out and fly and count deer as an example, those activities qualify to be reimbursed through Pittman-Robertson at a rate of 75%, 25%. The state has to match that at 25% level. So, and then there's some other requirements on that money. We have to, in order to create or to not create what they call a diversion of federal funds, we have to have the ability to decide how the money's spent, and we have to and it has to be spent on those particular purposes, those that I just outlined: wildlife conservation, hunter education, those kind of things. The money as a nation is divided up amongst states based on the number of license sales, based on their population. There's a formula they use to allocate that money to the states. The one thing that is, I'll bring up, that's excluded, that was not in the founding legislation, is law enforcement. So all of our law enforcement activities are not reimbursed by Pittman-Robertson. That comes entirely out of the Game and Fish Operating Fund.
Follow up, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much did you spend on ranges and or shooting sports?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James. So on ranges, I'm going to have to get back with you. Recently, it's been a while since we've spent money on gun ranges, on a specific gun range. I know we contributed to the Archer complex in Cheyenne, and I've got somebody giving me a note here. We've issued some grants around the state to the tune of about $30,000 recently. So that's what's happened recently. Again, the amounts that we allocate to those different activities varies, but it's much, much higher to the kind of standard everyday wildlife management activities.
Follow up, Senator James.
Thank you. Would you be able to give us kind of a breakdown on how you decide where this money goes and what the qualifications for these gun ranges and shooting sports and the hunter education, and how you decide where this money goes, that type of thing? Would you be able to give us that type of breakdown for it?
Absolutely. Or do you want a specific breakdown that I send you later, or do you want me to kind of talk through how we do that now?
If you could give it something like later, that'd be great. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James.
Good. Further questions for the committee? Okay, we'll proceed on, Director Nesbitt.
Okay, so the first item I saw on your agenda was a discussion on the authority to modify hunting seasons based on COVID. I think the answer to this is rather short. The commission has, through statute, the authority to promulgate rules on bag limits, hunting seasons, license allocations, basically all of those things that influence a hunting season. And so the answer to the question is the commission has that authority to make modifications, not just for COVID, but for whatever reason they may see fit. And so, the next question I guess I would assume some folks may have is, are there any discussions today about making modifications to hunting seasons based on the current pandemic? And the answer to that question is very simply no. Right now, we have not identified any particular actions that we could take that would help, follow CWC guidelines better, or follow our state health directives better by modifying hunting seasons. I will say that, last spring, when we made some changes to the sale of non-resident daily fishing licenses, that was in response to, early in the pandemic, that was a direct response to the fact that we were having more than normal, a higher amount than normal of folks coming specifically from the South, from Colorado, but other states as well, states that were under a stay-at-home order that were coming to our state. And we saw an increase in activity at a lot of our local, particularly fishing areas, public access areas and lakes. And so that was in response to that. You know, again, though, to look forward to this fall, I certainly haven't had any discussions. I'm not hearing much from anybody at all about making modifications based on the pandemic.
Questions from the committee? Questions from the committee? I'm going to assume staff will inform us if we have public comment trying to come in from afar. So if not, we'll move on to the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So next topic I saw on your agenda was a discussion of game warden stations. I'm going to provide a concise and brief background on that program, that particular program that we have, and then talk a little bit about where I see this going in the coming years. So dating back probably 100 years, when the Game and Fish Commission first started hiring game wardens around the state, one of the things that was developed and implemented as a service to the public was in local communities, department purchased game warden stations. And it became a requirement that if you were employed by the agency as a game warden, a requirement of your employment was you had to work out of the game warden station, and you also had to serve the public out of that game warden station. In the early days, a lot of those things that were the activities at the game warden stations were selling licenses. Actually, back then, a game warden's wife was expected to sell licenses out of the game warden station. They tagged beavers, they checked in mountain lions, they checked in black bears, conducted law enforcement activities. And over the years, you know, those activities have changed, but we continue to this day to serve the public out of those warden stations. The public, the use of those by the public, a lot of times is much, much higher in the smaller communities than it is the larger communities. Those communities where there's a regional office, folks over time have moved away from using the local warden station to go into the regional office. However, with that said, we still have requirements in our state, regulations that require that, for example, if you harvest a mountain lion, you have to check that mountain lion in within 72 hours. And so we have a lot of times folks that are still using those game warden stations to check in mountain lions, black bears, gray wolves, you know, all those kind of activities that happen after hours, and that, you know, have to sometimes happen on a weekend. If somebody harvests a black bear over Memorial Day weekend on a Thursday night, they may not be able to check that thing in within the regulatory requirements if they wait till a regional office is open the following week. So those services continue to be provided at game warden stations around the state. And again, if you know, the game warden station in Bags, for example, is pretty darn important to that local community, and the one in Casper isn't used nearly to the extent that it used to be. The other thing that we've used those warden stations for that has turned out to be a really big benefit for the department is equipment storage and supply storage. So, you know, in our outlying game warden stations, oftentimes game wardens need a snow machine and a small boat, you know, to do their job. And then they may have damage fence too that they need to be able to provide to local landowners when they're experiencing big game damage. We store evidence oftentimes at game warden stations. And so over the years, we've continued to have the program. We've continued to maintain 50 of those across the state for each district game warden. And it's been successful. It's been evaluated. The overall program's been evaluated 5 or 6 times in my career, last 25 years. Most recently, we did an external audit, if you will, or a programmatic review that was conducted from an outfit, an independent outfit that came in and evaluated multiple programs in the agency. The game warden station program was evaluated, and they recommended to continue on with it. Recently, we've had additional, we've done another evaluation here just recently, and I think we're at a point where we are starting to move forward with, through attrition, eliminating the game warden stations in those regional office towns where the public has the option to be served at a regional office. And there are some exceptions to that. So like I mentioned, Casper, the public use is very low. And so, you know, the impacts on the agency and the public of not having a game warden station in Casper 2 years from now they're not significant. When you look at another regional office town though, like Pinedale as an example, when we send a game warden to Pinedale, we need him or her to show up on day one ready to go to work. And one of the requirements in those type of places, Jackson, Cody, Pinedale, are that our wardens have their own horses that they use for department work. And so some of those warden stations are set up right now to facilitate that, so that we can just send a game warden there and then go to work day one. They don't have to go find a house that sometimes is not affordable to an entry-level game warden, where it's big enough that they can not only house their family, but they can house horses and be able to have those kind of facilities. So there are some regional office towns where we will not be evaluating removing those warden stations, but places like, you know, Lander, places like Sheridan, Casper, Laramie, Cheyenne, those places we're looking at moving towards getting rid of those warden stations. It'll be a one-time, the sale of the property will be a one-time shot in the arm to the commission's operating fund or their operating reserve, and we'll save some money over time on the maintenance costs for those. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's kind of an overview of the background and where we're at today, and I'd be glad to answer any questions or address anything further that you're interested in.
Questions from the committee? Questions from the committee? I have one. Do you change the warden's wages then once you take the housing away from them? How do you determine how to compensate them for what you've taken away?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, they're not considered compensation. The provision of that warden station is not considered compensation because the employee has no choice. They have to live in there. If they want to go out and buy their own house and live in it, we don't allow them to do that. They have to live in the warden station. So because it's an expectation and a requirement of employment, it's not a benefit. So if we no longer provide a warden station in a particular town, the employee will know that before they ever assume that position, and they will not be compensated any differently than other wardens around the state. I will tell you that in the past, oftentimes when this was evaluated, there was that was part of the calculus that we were worried about being able to recruit. That's something that made Wyoming attractive, is that we did, for the younger employees, require them to live in that warden station. But for retention over time, a lot of the older wardens, you know, weren't interested in it. They wanted to go and buy their own house. So that's been one of the factors that's been considered. But at the end of the day, it's not, for tax purposes or anything else, it's not considered compensation.
Good, thank you. Any further questions? Do we have any public comment out? I'm just going to rely on staff if someone's out there that they break in. Otherwise, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we do have a couple of people in the waiting room for public comment, and I will add them now.
Perfect, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter has his hand up.
Representative Winters, go ahead while we're waiting to get them in.
Representative Winters, your mute is on.
Okay. Thank you. I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Nesvik. I'll restate what I just said. Could you give us a little bit of a rundown on what's going on with the Jackson situation where you were proposing to build some homes there? Thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter. We have slowed that down a little bit just because We are, you know, the future's uncertain. We haven't stopped it though. That problem is a 2 or 3 decades old problem, and it's not going away. It'll be, if we don't work on it now, it'll still be a problem a decade from now. So we haven't spent any money on it other than just do some low cost studies, but we are continuing to keep that on our plate as something that we're going to look at in the future. Our partners like the Department of Transportation have also, you know, put the brakes on their work that they've been doing. And so we're kind of letting everybody see where this whole situation we're in right now kind of shakes out before we take that to the next step. But I certainly don't want the committee to take that to mean that we're not continuing to talk with local leaders in Jackson and talk with architects and those kind of things. We have, as recently as 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we had another meeting with local leaders in Jackson about that.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Further questions from the committee? Okay. Looks like we have Lisa Robertson on for public comment. Are you ready, Lisa?
I am. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Continue on.
All right, thank you very much. Chairman Driscoll and Miller and members of the committee, good morning. It's good to see you all again. It's been a year, I think, since we've met. As you know, just quickly, I'm Lisa Robertson. I live in Wyoming for more than half my life. I love it. I volunteer most of my time for wildlife issues. And so that's why I'm here today to talk to you about 24-hour track checks, to try to introduce that into Wyoming. I've sent you some information. You had the interim request, which basically covers everything I'm going to cover today, just a quick public comment. But thank you for letting me respond. Trapped animals are exposed to the elements and the bitter cold, frostbite, dehydration, unable to escape from potential predation, other animals attacking and feeding on them. Trapped animals suffer from mouth injuries and dislocations in their attempt to escape the trap. Some lose teeth, some eventually bite off or twist off their trapped paw. Trappers call it ring off. Some escape with a trap or snare attached. A wolf trapping study was conducted in Minnesota between April and October of last year, with almost all captures occurring when temperatures were above freezing. The protocol was daily trap checks. The trap tested with a leg hold trap, and given the trap name, the injuries were moderate to severe, and the rest were described as uninjured to having mild injuries. Serious leg injuries are relatively common, however, compared with different trap types tested in other studies. 63% were scored as having moderate to severe damage, including major cutaneous lacerations and other damage. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies represents North America's fish and wildlife agencies to advance sound science-based management and conservation of fish and wildlife and their habitats in the public interest. They try to educate those who use traps about the most humane, safe, selective, efficient, and practical devices. Association Fish and Wildlife Agencies states, make a commitment to check your traps at least once every day. When you set out a trap line, you assume responsibilities. Animal welfare.
I hate to interrupt you. How long are you going to go? Because basically the commission has taken this up and our committee will take it up. But really what you're doing is testifying on a bill, and this is mainly public comment on what we've done. So go ahead and wrap up, but this isn't one of our topics at this meeting.
Okay, are you saying this is public comment for what you just covered and that it's not, the public can't make any comment at all otherwise?
We'll take any comment, but we generally limit the public comment to a pretty tight time frame. We're sitting here trying to stay on schedule. And if you want to take a few minutes, it's fine, but the way you're going, it sounds pretty similar to what we get testimony that's 30 minutes or 40 minutes at a time, and that's gonna put us late into the day.
So you're saying the committee will cover this. When will that be?
The committee will visit about it at some point in time and talk. At this point, Director Nesvik made it clear that the commission has the authority on this, and they actually are doing a study at this time. And this is me only as a chairman speaking, but the committee will talk about it. But generally, as a whole, the legislature does not take up things that the commission's going over until they've done their findings, and then we move from that point to either legislate or to do legislation to back up what they do. Is that's what you think, Co-Chairman Miller?
Could I ask a question, please? Chairman Driscoll, this is not under the jurisdiction of Game and Fish. It's under the jurisdiction of the legislature. Anytime you reduce track check times, it is your decision and not the department's. And the department already recommends 24-hour track checks on their online hunter course. But are you saying that the committee just does not want to take up this?
No, ma'am. I did not step on Game and Fish toes. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Maybe the Director Nesvik should comment here. I think he said something earlier in his general testimony that the commission was looking at this. Director, can you refresh our memory there again?
Absolutely, Mr. Co-Chairman and Mr. Chairman. So the commission directed the department to study this issue, and we have begun that study. My anticipation is that we'll be able to report updates to the commission and recommend final action, if there will be final action that we recommend by the November commission meeting. There is one other meeting between now and then, and that's in September. The other thing I would say is that if the department believes and the commission approves recommendations that require legislative changes, I will be coming to both you, co-chairman, to talk about what those recommended legislative changes may be. At this point in time, there are no, we haven't developed those recommendations, but I will assure you that if we think statutory changes are needed, we'll come to the legislature with that, particularly you two co-chairman. And that's what we did as an example when we did some changes to trapping laws in 2008. We worked on it within the department. We came up with recommendations that could be handled through regulation and recommendations that could be handled through the legislature. And we brought those to the legislature, and you all acted on it at that time.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Robertson indicated that you didn't have the ability to do 24-hour trap check. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think what I heard you say is that we recommend 24-hour trap check. And
Mr. Chairman or Mr. Director, no, do you have the ability to regulate and force them to do 24-hour trap check if that's a recommendation, or does it have to be legislative?
Mr. Chairman, that would be a legislative, that'd be a legislative issue. And certainly the approach we've taken in the past with many issues is there are things that are in law, and then there's also, some things that we say, this is what's required, but these are some other best practices you can implement on your own. And so there are some of those things out there that we've asked folks to think about.
Thank you, Co-Chairman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair and Director. Just a reminder for everyone listening, is the next session, general session in January, pretty much allows any bills to address issues like this. So, Lisa and any others listening, get with your local legislators and see if they will run a bill specific to what you're thinking right here, right now. That'll be the time to bring that type of legislation, and it'll be assigned probably to TRW committee, and there'll be all kinds of opportunity to take testimony at that time specific to that bill. So just want to remind everyone how the process works. And again, this is the general session coming up. So again, talk to your local legislators, start working on a draft bill with them, and see how it comes out for the general session come January.
Okay, we'd be glad to do that. And just for your information, I did give you a copy of the draft bill that was in your email shortly. So we actually have a draft bill ready to go. So whenever you're ready to discuss it, we will be too.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sorry to be short with you. No intention to have you not testify, but we really do try to stick to topic. You can bring them up, like you say, to start the process rolling, but the real testimony comes down the road.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Chairman, I show one last item on your agenda for game and fish, and I'll give you a summary of I think what you may be interested in, and certainly answer some questions. So recently we've had a reemergence of issues around the state and concern with domestic and wild sheep conflicts and interactions. This is not new to our state necessarily, but Wyoming has been a leader in solving these problems in a Wyoming way. Back in the early 2000s, at that time, Director Terry Cleveland of the Game and Fish and Director John Etcheper of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture worked together with all the stakeholders, wool growers, stock growers, conservation groups, wild sheep organization, veterinarians, and they concluded their work with the Wyoming plan. And really this plan laid out an agreement amongst all the different constituents of how wild sheep and domestic sheep would work or would interact together around the state. There were certain areas that were identified as non-wild sheep emphasis areas, meaning that in those areas, when there was a conflict, decisions would be made in the favor of the domestic sheep grazing. And then there were areas that were identified as emphasis areas for wild sheep. And in those areas, as an example, the main sheep areas down the Absaroka front from Powell south to Thermopolis, in those areas, policy decisions would be made for the benefit of wild sheep. That plan has remained sound and has remained well supported within our state. It's actually the envy of a lot of other states. There's litigation that's happened on forests in Idaho that really didn't go necessarily the way that either the domestic livestock folks or the wildlife folks wanted it to go. And if they would have had something in place like we do in Wyoming, they believe they would have prevailed and everybody would have been in a better spot. So again, we really think this plan is a good, sound plan, and it reflects the interests and values of all of our state. In fact, it was, the support for that even grew more here, I want to say, Mr. Chairman, 4 years ago, roughly, and that Wyoming plan was adopted in statute. And so it's currently codified in Wyoming statutes. And so it continues to be the way we do business in Wyoming. Now, with that said, we have recently had some additional, the emergence of some conflicts with domestic sheep. The problem with domestic sheep commingling with wild sheep is, and there's not 100% agreement on the science on this. I want to make sure I'm upfront about that, but there's certainly strong evidence, at least from the department's perspective, that there are certain pathogens that can be transferred from domestic sheep to wild sheep or wild sheep to domestic sheep that at the end of the day are not good for the persistence of wild sheep. As an example, in our Whiskey Mountain herd near Dubois, that population has suffered nearly 50% losses over the last 20 years. And we attribute that die-off to bad pathogens, pneumonia basically, or cytoplasma is what it's called. And there hasn't been domestic sheep there for a long, long time. Those are bugs that were there in those sheep a long time ago and have continued to just plague that herd. So this is, the interest in keeping those two domestic and wild sheep separated is really in the interest of health of wild sheep, because they're just not very resilient to those bad bugs, those bad bacteria. Recently, there have been, I talked with the committee just short of a year ago about conflicts we were having in near Thermopolis, west of Thermopolis, where there were domestic sheep that were being grazed on private lands, but they were very close to where sheep existed on public lands. And we were concerned enough that we felt like the proximity of the wild sheep with the domestic sheep was such that we needed to go and remove those wild sheep. We ultimately did not remove them. They left on their own, but that problem continues to persist in that part of the world. An exacerbation of the problem is the fact that this particular grazer, this livestock owner that has these domestic sheep, is consistently suffering from pretty significant losses from large carnivores, and it's all of them: mountain lions, black bears, grizzly bears, and wolves. And on an annual basis, they lose significant numbers of their livestock, both sheep and cattle, to those species. So, you know, it's really come to quite the conflict. I personally met with the producer. I know the wild sheep folks have met with them, the department has met with them, and we're working now to try to find some solutions to maintain some separation between the two herds. We're not close to a solution yet, but the committee should know we're working on it. We've spent, you know, outside of the sheep, the domestic wild sheep issue, just, you know, for the edification of the committee, the commission has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last few years in livestock damage payments to that particular producer. So this is an issue that I don't see a short-term solution for. We are looking very hard at what we're going to do. If we do have domestic and wild sheep coming close together again, I would, you know, that Absaroka front, those wild sheep along the Absaroka front are Wyoming's crown jewel sheep herd. I mean, that's really where it's at. We have a resource there that other states just don't have. So we'll continue to watch it. It's a high priority for us, and I would be glad to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Freeman.
About 4 years ago, we had members of your committee on sheep and domestic sheep going through there, and I was very impressed with people with conflicting interests coming in for a common solution. Is that committee still in business? Is there still the dialogue between those competing interests?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Freeman, absolutely. That group continues to exist. And we actually, you know, we have some initial discussions now about whether we need to re-implement what happened when the original plan was adopted, and you know, look at a more focused, smaller group to try to solve this issue. And that may be where it ends up.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Flintner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Nesbitt, what kind of losses do you have in your wild population with regard to predators?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flintner, that is an extremely difficult thing to quantify, and it varies around the state. And we don't have, it's extremely costly to study that. And the reason is that you have to go and identify the cause-specific mortality. Since wildlife die from so many different things, if you're not there right away to figure out what killed it, it's hard to do those kind of studies that say, you know, that show you how many animals, like let's just say elk, for example, are killed by wolves. However, with that said, we have done some localized studies. We've one in particular up in the Sunlight Basin area, and that study concluded, it was a $750,000 study, and it concluded basically that wolves had an impact on those migratory elk to a level of probably about 65% of the issue with very, very low productivity. About 2/3 of that problem was directly related to wolf predation. We know that for example, in the Jackson area where moose have declined dramatically, that there are certainly some habitat reasons for that, but there are also definitely the introduction of wolves into that area has certainly had an impact on the number of moose that exist now in Jackson. We know that down in a recent study down in the Red Desert, or not the Red Desert, but the Little Mountain area down in Representative Freeman's country, we know that a study there indicates that coyotes actually have a pretty significant effect on newborn fawns, and they actually migrate in. The coyotes migrate from 100 miles away into that area when fawns are born, and they have an impact on fawns. We have other areas of the state where we have extremely high densities of predators, and we don't seem to have an effect on wildlife. We still have very robust and abundant wildlife populations. So it's very much a mixed bag. To know the answers, you have to spend money and you have to focus it very locally. Kind of a common wildlife management principle is that if habitats are healthy and you don't have to compete with a lot of disease problems, that predation has an effect that's not additive. It's they call it compensatory mortality, but that predation is not at a level that has an impact on herd health and productivity, and that when you have all those other factors, limiting resources with habitat, disease issues, and other things affecting the population, the predation can have an exacerbating effect. In other words, just make it worse. An effect that's already occurring, they can make it worse. So that, you ask a question that is on the minds of a lot of sportsmen around the state. And because of that, we've invested some funds in trying to find answers to that. We have another study that's going on right now in the Cody and Meeteetse area that's looking at those answers, both as they relate to interactions with cattle as well as with wildlife. And so, one question we hear is, so if wolves are eating a lot of cattle, does that make wildlife populations more robust? And then vice versa. If wolves are eating a lot of elk, are there less cattle depredation? So anyway, we'll be interested to see how that work comes out. But this is certainly an issue that's of interest to us as well as our constituents.
Further questions? Representative Leonard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Nesvik, could you, or do you know if the University of Wyoming is still doing range condition studies in the Whiskey Mountain area relative to sheep management?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, the answer to that is yes. We have a major study going on there now that actually focuses on the disease aspect of sheep, as well as range condition, as well as predation. And all of those factors are being considered. And the way they do that is they've got collared ewes. And so that's the first effort. They go out and capture and collar a bunch of ewes. And then they put vaginally implanted transmitters into those ewes. And when they birth, that transmitter is expelled, and it gives a signal that says that the lamb was just born. And they get in there as quick as they can before the evidence is gone, so that they can determine what killed, or if the lamb, first of all, if the lamb's alive, and if it's dead, what killed it. The initial results of that study is that certainly in that part of the world, predation has an effect, as does habitat conditions, as does things that we would have never expected. Like they've got a picture of one they found just this spring that it jumped off of a rock and its leg hung up in the rock and it died from that. So yeah, answer to your question though, Representative Winter, is that study is continuing to be funded.
Well, thank you so much.
Further questions from the committee? Further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
you have Karen Zoller in the waiting room, and Ronald Norberg also signed up. I'm not sure if he's in person. So
Okay.
I will admit Karen, and if you see Ronald Norberg there, I'll let you handle that.
Thank you. Welcome, Karen. Can you hear us, Karen? think you're muted, Karen. Can you hear us, Karen? We can see you, but we can't hear you. Still not getting any audio. Are you guys getting any?
Remind Karen that she's on.
Karen, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us? I don't think she can hear us either, apparently. Got no audio from her. Do you have a way to text her, Mary Beth?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I will email her now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just for your information, in the participants list, it's not indicating that she has an audio source
I saw that.
through her connection.
I looked down the list on mute her and didn't even see a mic. So I think we'll try to bring her back later if we can figure out, unless we got something pretty quick here.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Co-Chairman.
are you Ronald? You?
No.
No, okay. There's no one out in the hallway.
Yeah, is Ronald Norberg out in somewhere? Because we'll use him as well if we can. Co-Chairman Miller's going to look. I think what we'll do, we're at about break time. And if Karen wants to work and try to figure out, oh, it shows connecting to audio. Maybe we're about to get her. Let's give it 1 second here. There we go. No. We're trying, Karen.
Mr. Chairman, I suggested to Ms. Zoller that if she would like to call in, so to participate on the toll-free number, the number is located at the bottom of the invitation, the Zoom invitation, and you know that might be a better solution for her.
That would be great. If she wants to get ready to do that, I think we're set for a 15-minute break. So I think what we'll do is take a break if that's all right with her.
Mr. Chairman, I think she may have solved the audio problem.
Okay,
Hi.
very good.
Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome, Karen.
Welcome.
Let us know what's on your mind.
Thank you. So my name is Karen Zoller. I'm a citizen of Wyoming. I was running on public land and my dog is the dog that got trapped by a power snare and killed. And I was told it's legal to kill my dog on public land per Wyoming trap law. This has changed my life. I've written everybody. I hope you've gotten some of my letters. I've joined in with Wyoming Untrapped. We started our own organization here, Why Trap Fremont County, Public Safety on Public Land, because this is a big issue. We all share public land. And Lisa was, invited me to join this because she was going to present the live traps with live trapping with 24-hour checks, which has been which is one of the reform agendas. And I thought that we're going to listen to that today. One of the things that I think is interesting is that trapping affects everything. And I think the travel committee and your recreation committee is a big committee for this issue because we bring recreation into the state and we want people to enjoy our lands, and our landscapes are loaded with hidden traps. So this is an important committee just to join in and work with as we try to make Wyoming landscape safer from hidden traps, because it is a danger. So I just wanted to say hi. We're here. We're working with Game and Fish. We're working with the public. We're working with trappers, because we can all work together on this and make it good for all on our public lands. So I look forward to meeting you all more. And it doesn't have to be this way where our dogs are murdered and killed in something hidden with no signs, no anything, just dead. And this issue is important because this snare that Wyoming is telling me is legal, it is not in the rule book. There is no legal document that Wyoming can give me to say it's legal. And nobody knows about it. The leadership of Wyoming, Governor Gordon didn't even know about it. Fish and game leaders didn't know about it. Department of Ag didn't know about it. I had to look it up. Even the sheriff, when the sheriff said it's legal, I had to look it up. No one told me about the snare. Me and my husband were like searching for it. I looked at the Game and Fish videos. There was nothing about that snare, nothing. And it had added a spring attachment that was pure kill. So the Fish and Game isn't even responsible enough to educate the public that this is out here on our public land. So it's a big issue, and that snare is on our public land. And that trapper is supported by law to kill dogs, animals. So it just doesn't make sense, and it's not the right thing to do. And I think we can make it better. But that is a big issue. Anyway, I just want to say hi. Thank you.
I thank you a lot, Karen. Stay on. We'll have some questions. I've got great empathy for you and your dog, and I feel for you. Co-Chairman Miller.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Co-Chairman Miller and I, what we talked about, there's a process, and it's really frustrating, and I understand your frustration with it, but first stop kind of is Game and Fish, and we kind of allow them to do that. The other route is individual bills before they come, and we're kind of working our way through it. I think you're going to see, without a doubt, some changes in how we do it. Responsibility on both ends, both from the trappers, Game and Fish, and from the people that have dogs. It's a three-way, it's not a two-way. And I think you're going to see that comes. It probably won't come as quickly as you like. It seems like we never work very rapidly. So
No, it's good. It's good.
my apologies to you on the speed that what we move at and the frustration with the process. And it's something that we often see is our process looks like it's pretty easy to jump out and change laws. And when you really get into it, it's a long, arduous process that rarely is anybody totally happy with what the results are. So I encourage you to hang in there. We do understand and have good feelings for what's happening and what's going on. And it's on the rise. As we got more people using these public grounds, there's no doubt the impacts are higher on all fronts. And I'll give you my word that, you know, we're going to deal with it in an efficient manner over time. I think Co-Chairman Miller has some comments, and then if you'd like, I'll let you talk. Co-Chairman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And Karen, we're sorry for the loss of your pet. You know, those things are horrible. You know, it's like losing a child to many people. So we understand the issue. And as the co-chair mentioned, the legislative process is a slow process. This has gotten some really good attention. You've drawn a big attention to this issue, and we're working on it. Whether the committee brings out a bill, I don't know if they will, but you know, working with your local legislators to bring a bill for the general session is the fallback position. So the bill mentioned earlier by Lisa will be looked at that time in the general session coming up in January. Again, we're sorry it's a slow process. These lands where you take your pets and such are multiple use lands. So there's not just one use. It's not just recreation. People are there doing other things on the public lands also. So we have to accommodate everyone. But, you know, from the beginning, I thought just, you know, signage would be a helpful thing to let people know that these potentially hazardous items are out there on the public lands in a particular area where you may be exercising your dog. So we're working on it. Thank you for your testimony, and you know, you're being heard. No doubt about that. So thank you for testifying.
Oh,
Karen, would you like one more swing at the ball? You're more than welcome to.
well, when you really look at this, the core is the Constitution. If you understand the Constitution, it says you can hunt, trap, and fish, but you do not infringe upon the rights of others, and you do not alter the duty of the state to manage wildlife. So it is a big responsibility from the core, right? And that is Wyoming heritage. So I think it's time now that we do come together, everybody, because we have to think of others. Trappers, when they place a trap, it doesn't matter. It will kill anything in its path. So they're responsible for every trap they place and thinking of others. And there's many solutions. We've made proposals. Everyone has them. Trap reform, trap-free lands. You know, it's just something to look into. But that really is the core to honor as a sportsman.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Keep up the good fight. Like I said, it's difficult. So thank you, and feel free to get a hold of us. I think Representative Yin's brought those bills before. I think he wants to talk now. So he's a good friend of yours and an effective legislator. So you've got a good one in your corner. Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, I have not brought a trapping bill before, so but I would consider it. But I do think that it does fall under this committee's interim topics, as well as even tomorrow we have a bill draft in consideration that was in response to public comment that was given at our last meeting. So I think I would like for our committee to take a look at it at our next meeting, if that would be at all appropriate. And I think that would also expedite the Game and Fish Commission to come up with recommendations for our next meeting. If our committee would really like to handle this issue, I think we can and we should, just like we respond to other issues that come up through public comment before. I don't think necessarily that any one bill draft is going to be the right way to do it, but I think that's something that our committee should discuss. What are solutions where we can balance the needs of all multiple uses, whether it's trappers or people who use our public lands, so they don't affect each other in ways that are harming any single party unnecessarily. And so I personally don't want to see any of my pets get hurt, or even any of my constituents get hurt because they walk into a trap that they can't see when they're on a hiking trail or anything like that. So I would love for us to tackle this at our next meeting, and I hope that we can put that on the agenda. If so, Coach Evans.
Representative Winter. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead. Representative Tass. Sorry, I thought you said Winter when you did. Representative Tass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it probably is a problem, but I don't think we ought to get out ahead of the Game and Fish. They're doing studies like this, and we should allow them to bring their recommendations, and then we can work on them at that time. So I think we need to not get ahead of them and let the Game and Fish do their job. So thank you.
to make it work. So was I muted through most of that? Okay, thank you. Any further testimony?
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Feel welcome to come anytime. You're going to get there. Well, believe me, you'll have a bill draft at some point in time coming. These issues that continue to reappear, I've never seen them not have bill drafts come. And I'll warn you as it comes, don't be disappointed after 3 or 4 times of bills either not meeting your expectations or not passing. Don't give up. That's how bills get passed.
Yes, thank you, because we can all work together. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions? If not, we're going to go on break till 10 o'clock. We're roughly on schedule. I thank everybody for that. So with that, we'll everybody mute and kill your feed, and we'll be on break till 10.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go back to my commission meeting unless you think there's other items you're going to need me for.
Director Nesvik.
Yes, sir. Were you able to hear me?
I am now. I didn't. I was just in the process of shutting down. Go ahead.
Just going to say, I think that concludes the items I had, and I'm going to go back to my commission meeting unless you need further help from me.
No, sir. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your testimony as always.
You bet. Have a great day.
Righty. Thank you. All right, we'll come back to order. Next up is State Parks, Cultural Resources, and we're going to do a bill draft to start with. I'm not sure, do we have someone from the parks to present, or is Darren going to do it from there? So Director Westby, if you'd like the floor to lead us through the bill draft, which is, I guess we don't have a number on it. I'll pull it up. I've only got one computer, so we'll start on the bill draft. Director Westby, if you'd like to explain it, what it does and why we need it.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the TRW committee. My name's Darren Westby. I'm the Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. With you there in Thermopolis, I believe, is my Deputy Director, Nick Nayland, and District Manager, Brooks Jordan. And so hopefully if I don't hit on what needs to be hit, they'll step up and try to assist me as well. So again, thank you for your time, and also thank you for your efforts on this bill, as well as the efforts of LSO and getting this bill draft to you today. In essence, this bill, I think it's numbered 21 LSO 0031 working draft 0.5. And this is titled State Parks Accounts Expenditure Authority. In short, Mr. Chairman, this bill opens up 36.4.121, which is our fee statute. What it does is it increases the not more than percentage from 30% to 60%. And it also changes the definition on how we can use these fee dollars to include administrative and operational costs. Currently, as stated in the statute, we can only use them for maintenance. However, we need to expand this to include the operations to help cover future proposed budget reductions. Also, Mr. Chairman, notice on the bill, it's upon July, it becomes effective upon July 1. Just our 2 cents on it. We'd like to see it be made upon signature rather than July 1. And since this is a budget, also since this is a budget related issue, we'd also like to see if there is a special session, if it's appropriate or necessary to have it inserted and discussed at that time. But with that, Mr. Chairman, that's a really fast rundown of what we were trying to accomplish and where we're at currently.
Okay. Questions from the committee? We're gonna have to put COVID in the title if you want it in the special session.
Okay. Well, I don't want COVID in it.
Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, would this be in addition to your operations budget or to supplement?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, it's to augment our existing budget. With our budget reductions that we're proposing right now, we are, again, as we have been for the last 11 years, moving as much of the general fund, not really, we're never, it's going to be very difficult for this agency to get off the general fund. However, over the course of the last 11 years, since 2009, we have really worked hard, excuse me, we've really worked hard to get our system to a point where we've gone from a 66% general fund agency to 58%. And this just allows us to move a little bit closer in that regard. So over the last 11 years since 2009, we've been a significant, our budget has grown. I'll just tell you that our budget has grown $7 million over the course of those 11 years. However, out of that $7 million, the general fund has only grown $400,000 in 11 years. And so our agency has worked really hard to still provide the level of service that our consumers are desiring, that everybody wants out of the State Parks and Cultural Resource Agency. But we've been trying to, through all the reductions, find ways to increase our special revenue and other funds to continue to provide those services at the level that is desired while still helping to decrease the general fund.
Senator
James, follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what type of administrative costs are you wanting?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, the ability right now in the statute, it says that we can use up to 30% for only for maintenance. We do have in the state park system, we have feed program, which is not maintenance. We have other administrative costs within just operating the offices within the system. We also have some administrative costs here in Cheyenne to help augment what is being done out in the field. And so the ability to reduce our general fund by increasing the use of what we can use our fees for will be greatly appreciated.
Follow up, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if you could be a little precise on defining what those administrative costs are. Be a little more specific, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, right now, the administrative costs that we're looking at utilizing some of these fees are more locally. We do have some, like I said before, we do have some personnel in that are support staff that we could, not necessarily paying salaries, but the programs in which the planning agency helps the state park system go out and develop master plans, the engineering section that helps develop the construction projects out and maintenance projects out in the field, our other systems that are utilized to help ensure that our parks are ran in an appropriate fashion is the administrative side. So if you want specifics, I guess I'm going to have to get back to you on the specifics, but that's generally just administrative costs. For the most part, most of this money is going out into the field to ensure that our parks are being operated at the level that is being desired.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, if I could get a list of all the operational and the administrative costs that you're wanting and the justification, because doubling your percentage is kind of a big deal, and then also a couple years back, on how you guys have grown, kind of showing that growth right there, so that way we can see how you guys have grown. And then yeah, if we could just get something like that, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman and Senator James, if I could, I want to make really clear that the growth has been negligible, if any, and what we've done and what we continue to do with this percentage is decrease the amount of general fund. So it's not like we're doubling the amount of money we get to spend out in the parks. It is basically shifting our revenue stream of how we have our expenses to not only reduce, but also just get less of the general fund in our revenue streams and how we expend our expenditures. But we'll put together a list of operational and administrative items in which we think that these fees will be utilized for and get them out to the committee.
Thank you. And I've got a comment. If you look at the green sheet they handed out, that's going to cover the big part of the operational expenses for these parks. They're there, says kind of how they're spending them. So I was trying to study it. That's why I'm a little distracted. I hadn't seen it before. Co-Chairman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Westby, what these fees generate how many dollars per year? How significant is it?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, thanks for that question. Currently, we just in the last 2019, we're just a little over $3 million a year is what we generate in fees within our system.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Freeman.
Mr. Chairman, if we could have Director Westby talk about the increased number of people that have been using state parks and museums and sites. I think that will give you kind of a perspective of the growth that the department has had in providing services for the public of Wyoming and for tourists.
Thank you, Representative Freeman. That's kind of blends into the next bullet point, and I think we're kind of halfway there. So yeah, we'll continue on, Director Westby.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Freeman, thank you for that question and also digging the beard. But really, our state park system has grown since I've been in management. I'm definitely not taking credit, just that I've paid a lot more attention to it. We were in the 3 million, 8 years ago. I think this last year in 2019, we broached 4.4 million visitors. Just this last 2 months, in last 3 months, April, May, and June, our numbers have been 2.5 times what we've seen over the last 5 years with that 3-month time frame. So I think it kind of exemplifies not only the products in which we have to offer it, and it could be just this time with the COVID out there that people are really utilizing our services right now. But what we keep telling all of our teams is let's capitalize on that. Let's make sure that if they've never used Wyoming State Parks, let's make sure that we shine to allow them to remember us next year. And hopefully we capture a whole bunch of new visitors that become lifelong users. And I really appreciate that question because it gives me the opportunity to showcase and really beat my chest about how amazing staff is to go from, a standard year, which is stressful in and of itself, but to go 2.5 times the amount of people that come into our system and utilize, that puts a strain and a stress on people. Our human resources, not only our physical resources, but they do it with a smile on their face. They work their tail ends off to ensure that everybody has a good time and are safe, and really want to appreciate the opportunity to talk about how great our staff is.
Thank you. Senator Salmi Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director. I know you've done a good job with all of it. The one concern I hear from some of our residents, and maybe it's not true, is that they can't get camping permits because all these out-of-state people are taking all the residents' camping permits for Wyoming. And so I just want to be able to address my constituents' concerns because I've heard that often. They're a little angry sometimes. So can you talk to me a little bit about that concern, please?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Senator Ansalmi Dalton, thank you for that question. It is something that we've been dealing with for quite some time. And this year is probably a really unique year with that because with the COVID, if you remember, State Parks is not closed. We have stayed open for everybody to use on a day use basis through the entire event. However, when late February, we were noticing our campgrounds were full in late February, early March with 100% out-of-staters, people trying to escape the larger populated areas. And it concerned not only as a state, people were just ascending into the state of Wyoming, but for staff out there that were having to interact with these people that more than likely possibly had COVID, but then everybody else that was around them. And so we closed camping for a little while, but when we closed it, the way we were able to get it approved to get back open was to go put all of our camping on the reservation system. So we had instant notification system, we were able to pick and choose which campsites were being used. If there were too many campsites in an area that were not conducive to socially distance, we took them off the system. But we also, when we came back online with the system and opened up camping to everybody, we only opened it up to Wyoming residents to make reservations. We canceled every out-of-state resident camping reservation, which costs us quite a bit of money. And I appreciate this committee taking that potential CARES funding reimbursement on your behalf the previous time. But we did put in a request to get reimbursed for all the fees that we had to reimburse on all of them. But I guess to get back to your question, when we came on, the in-state people had a month head start this year to get out there and get their campgrounds reserved, their campsites reserved for the rest of the year. And then we opened up about a month later to everybody, and we opened it up to out-of-staters. And you're right, we did get inundated with out-of-staters because we have great products. I spent a weekend down with my son down in Colorado, and I get why they're coming up to Wyoming. It's amazing the difference between our products versus theirs, the amount of people versus our wide open spaces. I get it. And so another thing I guess I need to bring up, Senator, is Nick, who's there in the room today, has been working really hard with our reservation system to do two things. One, get the fee, the transaction fee. Every time you reserve a campsite, you pay a transaction fee, not a per night fee, it's a transaction fee. Right now it's, I think, $7.75 per transaction fee. But I think as of maybe this week, the contract's been modified to where in-state transaction fees are now $4, out-of-state transaction fees are $8. So hopefully that limits a little bit of that consternation that we've been having through some of our conversations with constituents about the transaction fees. The next thing that Nick negotiated was to give Wyoming residents a week head start on getting the campsites reserved. So hopefully that will help, Senator, as well, when you're talking to your constituents, that the Wyoming residents now have a week head start. I think we're 120 days out now where you can reserve a campsite. That gives the Wyoming residents 1 week head start in front of anybody from out of state.
Senator James.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for those answers, Director Westby. Those are good answers. I have one just idea, and maybe it's not possible, but can they say that at least maybe our people aren't the quickest because they've always kind of led the Wyoming lifestyle? Could they say that at least 10% or 20% of the slots would be reserved for only Wyoming residents? I think that would make people happier in Wyoming. I don't know if that's possible with your system.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, thanks for that thought. I don't know programmatically if we can do that. However, what we've been telling everybody, and I know Chairman Driscoll has probably gotten an earful from a lot of his constituents up in the northeast part of the state. They started that petition to eliminate the reservation, the 100% reservation system that we have going on right now. And we're not going to, just so you're aware, we're not going to eliminate the 100% reservation system for the rest of this season. However, what we keep telling everybody, and I'm 100% on board with this, is we're really going to evaluate at the end of this season how many campsites are going to go back onto the reservation system next season. And so the intent for that is to, that would open up first come, first serves for probably more of the in-staters that just want to go out for a weekend, and then they just roll the dice whether or not there's an open spot or not. But I can't guarantee that we're not going to be 100% reservable. And that's where I think a lot of the consternation from the petitioners is they, excuse me, they wanted us to guarantee that we would not be 100% reservable. My crystal ball is not working nearly as well as I should. I have no idea what this pandemic's going to look like next season. I'm very hopeful that we're going to be out of it and life will come back to some resemblance of normalcy, and we'll be able to pull some of those campsites off of the reservation and make them first come. But without having a better crystal ball, I'm not willing to go on record and saying that we will. But we are definitely leaning towards making some of those campsites non-reservable and first come, first served. But again, I can't guarantee it.
Further questions, Senator Manise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Westby, looking back at your proposed bill here, and what's the balance in that account as of today? Do you have any idea?
Mr. Chairman, there's probably close to 7 million in that account right now. It ebbs and flows as we get revenues coming in. Like the money that came in over the 4th of July was probably pretty strong. We had a great 4th of July. So those revenues are probably pretty significant, but then we also, that's where we pull all of our capital construction out of as well. So depending on what construction projects are going on, that pot is going to decrease, but all that money is spoken for either with the up to 30% maintenance side of the house or earmarked or obligated for a construction project.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. At the present time, what do you do with the 70%?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moniz, thanks. That right now, the 70% goes to capital construction, major maintenance, and interpretation.
Oh, okay. So how will increasing it to 60 affect your capital construction?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, it will decrease the amount of dollars we have to build new amenities for our constituent desired products, help with maintaining roads, building new boat ramps, replacing boat docks, replacing restrooms, everything that we go out with our survey every 5 years, and we utilize that market survey on a regular basis to ensure that we're staying up with what our consumers want and what they need. And so those dollars go towards those product offerings that are desired by our consumers. We fully know and appreciate by doing this 30 to 60% that we are going to decrease that. But in the same token, if we're faced with a budget reduction, I would rather, and it's really hard for me to say, Senator, but I would rather ensure that we can keep the lights on and keep our facilities at a level that our consumers have grown to be accustomed to, than building a whole bunch of new stuff and not be able to keep them open. And so we're hoping that in the long run, I think we talked a little bit at the last meeting that we have a little bit of elasticity in our fees. We're looking to adjust them through rules this fall and winter in hopes that we can come out with a new fee structure next year while still operating underneath the cap that you all set in statute to help offset a little bit of that so we can still have some construction dollars to build what our consumers are wanting.
So one more, if I could, Mr. Chairman. So is your goal here to shift general fund dollars over to this account? Is that what you're trying to do here?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, our goal is to eliminate general funds and utilize these funds to augment where we've reduced, yes.
So long-term, how wise of a move is this?
Mr. Chairman and Senator, it depends on which side of the fence you're on. You know, I think the one thing that I keep telling my team is that we're team players. We know that our state is in a monumental crisis right now, not only with pandemic, but in a revenue concern. And we are here to be a part of that, even though we know that we are a major player in the tourism industry and we have the ability to really impact local communities and enrich every life that we touch, which is our mission. However, short term, we're able to do that with the general fund reduction and augmenting our losses or our reduction by switching more into a special revenue scenario. But the good part, I guess, if we have any solace at all, we have the ability to increase our fees to help offset some of those losses as well. So there's definitely some conversation that we've had in the past with you that if we feel that we're bumping up into our cap that you all set, we will be coming back to try to raise that cap a little bit to give us more flexibility to try to offset some of those general fund reductions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Flintner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Westby, thank you for your presentation. And if you said this already, or if you've provided this information, my apologies, because I don't have it at hand, but what is the revenue percentage breakdown of in-state versus out-of-state campers in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Flintner, thanks for that question. I'd say we're probably 55-45 in-state versus out-of-state. It really depends. I just say 50-50. It really depends. You start looking at different parks, say Boise, for instance, it's probably more 65-35 in-state. You look at Glendo, it's probably 35 in-state, 65 out-of-state, because it just depends on the location of where the park or site is located. Obviously, the ones on the borders are going to probably see a higher percentage of out-of-state visitors versus in-state, and that correlates over to revenue as well.
Further questions? Further questions? Okay, do we have any public comment or comment from the crowd? Okay, with that, we'll move on, and I think we'll revisit that a little at this after we go through the concessions and that end of it. So with that, we'll move on to Hot Springs Park update on the contracts and go into the different concessionaires that are going to visit with us. So,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and add Taylor from Star Plunge, just so that she can listen to what's being discussed.
Very good. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'm going to ask Deputy Director Nick Nalen, who's in the room, to give the update on the Hot Springs State Park concession.
Mr. Nalen, I think that computer on the end is ready to go for you. Yeah, we can only do one at a time. Yeah. Perfect. And you can just proceed at will as you go.
Sure, Mr. Chair. Mr. Co-Chairman Committee. The feedback there, yeah. We are ready to go back out to RFP for the contracts for the Star Plunge and the Days Inn right now. We are waiting till the conclusion of this committee meeting to do so, but they're both ready to go right away. The Best Western, I'm going to refer to my notes here. The Best Western is in the midst of a 45-year contract that expires in 2043. And the TP pools are in the midst of a 35-year contract that expires in 2047.
Mr. Nalen, could you go somewhat in depth with the RFP and what it has? And I actually asked that if it's available, if we get a copy for the committee. We don't have to have it now, but where it goes. I saw the last one, obviously it went up online, but how's this one vary from the last one, and time frame that it's open, how you're publicizing it, somewhat in depth, please.
We've, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we've reviewed both RFPs, and they're going to go back out exactly as they were previously. We feel that the language in the RFP as it exists gives us the authority that we need to enforce any rules that are in the follow-up contract. If we get the RFP out in the next week or two, which there should be no problem doing, we want to keep it open for 90 days. We've received some advice from the Attorney General's office that says we should keep it open just a little bit longer because of the circumstances. So we plan to keep it open for 90 days and then review the proposals, if any, at that time.
Questions from the committee? I'll go against more. Okay, if we don't.
And we can absolutely, Mr. Chairman, we can actually absolutely get you a copy of that.
Well, if it was similar last time, we can pull it off the website as well.
Well, we've removed it from the website, sir, but we'll put it back up.
Approximately how many pages on each one?
Mr. Co-Chair, it's exactly the way it was before. They're significantly lengthy documents. I'm not entirely sure how long they are.
Okay, and what markets are we going to advertise these RFPs into? Are we just telling them here in Thermop, or are we going out somewhat nationally with it?
Mr. Co-Chairman, we put the contracts on our website. I'm sure we'll share them via social media. I'm not entirely sure where else we share them through the state procurement channels, I'm certain. But other than that, we don't go out of our way to advertise nationally that I know of.
Representative Tass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had understood that some of these contracts were on 30-day contract. Now this one here goes plumb out to 43. Are there others that are on 30-day contracts?
Mr. Naylor.
Mr. Co-Chair, I don't know the, I'm not sure if I understand your question, sir. We don't have anybody that's currently under a 30-day contract.
I think I can answer it a little bit for you. The bill that we passed, it was a bill I carried, basically outlawed the short-term contracts. So they've got out of those. I think, as far as I know, the only ones left is the Days Inn and the Star Plunge that's on a continuing basis. At this point, we're in a gray area of the law right now because of what happened. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Co-Chair. The current agreements with the Days Inn and the Star Plunge expire December 31st. So we ran the contracts through the end of the year, assuming we'd be able to have the RFP and new contract in place by then.
That law pretty much made it where they can't do, only under very specific circumstances can they go into short-term agreements now. So that's changed in law.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions?
Mr.
Naylor.
Mr. Co-Chair, the RFPs are approximately 45 pages each.
Thank you. Representative Winters.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry.
The question I have is, you mentioned that these RFPs will be open for another 90 days. Is that from this date, or when did it start?
Mr. Co-Chair, Representative, it'll be from the date that we issue them, which should be within the next week or two.
Thank you.
Mr. Naylor, can you walk us briefly, we're not trying for an hour's worth, but kind of what they do, how the bids work, length, does it have a set length in it, or do the concessionaires going to do it? And I guess also for me, I'm wandering on a little, have we updated appraisals? We're in a significantly different market now than we were in the last one? And then have we updated the appraisals?
Mr. Co-Chair, no, we have not updated the appraisals. We received advice from the Attorney General's office that we were good to go with the appraisals as they are. I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question?
Just a 30,000 foot overview of the layout. I'm not sure the committee understands.
Sure.
You know, the old contracts were 6-7 pages and were pretty light. And I want to know what level of detail you've gone into and what someone needs to submit. We may have someone watching this on the channel that has interest, that wants to know, being it's not on the website now, kind of what would happen if someone walked off the street and said, I have interest. What's the process? How do we treat the existing concessionaires?
Sure.
Do they have a preference or a right to meet? Some of that type stuff, because I know some of it are probably not enough.
Sure. Mr. Co-Chair, we opened the bids, the process for a 90-day period. Anybody can submit a request for an RFP, and at the end of the time frame, we'll take a look at all those proposals that came in. The current concessionaires don't have any preference according to the documents. Other than that, they have an existing relationship with us, and we know what they are capable of providing to the state, which over the decades has been a very high quality product, and so we certainly take that into consideration. At the end of the RFP process, we'll gather a committee together. We'll review the RFPs and then make a decision to accept or not accept any of the proposals.
Okay. I know, back to details on the concessions at the end of the RFP period or the contract period became ownership of the state. Is that going to be the same in this one? Is that the state over the term of the contract ends up owning facilities?
That is, Mr. Co-Chair, that is actually part of the new contract, that at the end of the contract period, the state would own all the concessions under the new contracts. And that's something that the new bidders have to take into consideration when they make their proposal.
Further questions from the committee? If we could get a copy of those after lunch, if it's possible, I don't know if it is. I sure would like to see them. We're going to have more discussion on this afternoon. And I think this falls into it. That's why this meeting's happening with them off. And I think it's of critical importance, particularly in a tight budget time, that this committee understands kind of what we're doing and what the next steps are, assuming someone does not accept an RFP. Because what I dealt with concessionaires before, I think they were in pretty good fear of signing up with you. They didn't know what to do because they didn't like it, but they didn't have any choice. Is that still the case?
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, we can absolutely get you copies of the RFP and contract document to have for you right after lunch. That's not a problem. You know, it's always been our desire to work with the existing concessionaires, and we continue to have that desire. We're not looking to come in and upend anything here in Hot Springs. We want to be good partners with the city and with the county, and it's our hope that we can come to a great agreement with everybody.
Very good, thank you. Further questions? Representative Tass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you just say that at the end of 20 years, the state would own the property?
Mr. Co-Chair, Representative, it's built into the contract that at the end of whatever period is agreed upon, that the properties will revert to the state. We feel after working internally and working with a consultant that the best scenario is for the state to own and operate these on their own. Now, the proposed time length for this to happen is up to the concessionaire to propose in the RFP. could be 25 years. It could be one of these other terms that the other facilities have as well.
Following. Yes, Mr. Chairman, well, that's a pretty tough line item there, that if you expect a company to come in and do major renovation and wherever on property that they own today, and in 20 years, they walk away empty-handed. I think that's pretty tough. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think that the idea is that the concessionaire, the new concessionaire, would know that going in and will build the necessary profit into their proposal moving forward.
Follow up, Mr. Reiner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't think the state should be in this kind of business. This is the state moving into businesses that are run by a private corporation and things. I don't think the state ought to ever move into owning these kind of businesses or any kind of businesses. That's beyond what I would agree to. So thank you.
Further questions? I guess I have one. I heard you say your ultimate goal is to own and operate them. And to me, I'm looking at this green sheet. You guys don't run a single operation basically that is profitable at this point. I'm not sure it makes any sense for the state to own and operate anything further. That's a comment of mine. It's just off the hip comment. It's not for the committee, but that's my comment is, my belief is, and we'll go into it this afternoon because I think it affects what we did with this green sheet. Well, we'll have a discussion if we have time, but what's appropriate for operating facilities and how it operates. So
Further questions from the committee?
Mr. Co-Chair, the idea is that when we take ownership, we don't run them ourselves.
Okay.
We would put them back out for a management agreement with a company that would run the facilities for us.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
We have no intention of actually doing that work ourselves.
All right. You just made me feel a lot better. Thank you.
We're not in that business.
Okay. Further questions from the committee? Okay, with that, we're going to head down the list, and I think at the top of it, we have the star, and I think we have Best Western first.
You have Best Western first on it. My list doesn't show it that way, but that'll work.
I'm looking at it.
Oh, I've got a different agenda, probably one they sent to me. We'll go to the Best Western first, please. Sorry about that. Mine shows the star first. So we'll have whoever's going to do the Best Western. Do we have them here in the room? And I'll give you a little background of what we're doing. So you're allowed up to 15 minutes. And there is no topic. We're not here to beat up, to bash, to do anything. It's more comments on, as we go into RFPs, you're under a long-term one yourself. So how it's worked for you, what your thoughts would be on a new one, because that's part of what this 90-day one may work and it may not. But what your thoughts on what RFP should look like and how we can improve your operation, because you're a vital part of this park, how we can help you improve it and how we can help make park relations and relations with you as a concessionaire as smooth as possible. So this specifically is not a bitch session. It's not here to hurt anybody's feelings or to tell anybody they're doing a bad job. I'm trying, as a committee person, Thermopolis is near and dear to me with these concessions. And I think it's really important that we find a way that we have a team effort to present to the public as high a quality services and amenities, both public and private, as we can. So with that, you have no framework. You can take as much or little time as you want. And I'd also like to know your thoughts on how we could improve visitation, not just for the park, but for Thermopolis, and bring it as our budgets get tougher. Tourism is going to play a key role in the state of Wyoming. And I think Thermopolis potentially contributes mightily to the state in tourism if we do the right thing. So come on up and give us your give us your thoughts, please. Identify yourself first and your business, please.
Brandon Rossiter. I'm the general manager at the Best Western. I guess I'm a little underprepared for this. I just found out about this meeting last minute, so I haven't really prepared anything. I know overall just kind of focusing on trying to raise the occupancy and stuff, and also protecting our town and my staff members of the, of the town and stuff. So I'm a little on edge. I'm not really quite sure what, I mean, is there any questions or what do I'm not.
I think a little talk about your contract a little and because you're secure where you're at in yours. This is a long-term contract. What would you do different if you were redoing it to make it more user-friendly for you and for the parks? Because our goal is to make it flawless. We're not here to beat you up, or we want to make sure you run a good operation. And that involves making those contracts. I'm involved in a number of them myself personally, not with the state, but otherwise. And how contracts are written define how your business works and what your attitude is towards your lessor. And part of it for me is getting this really right so that when we are there, we're not creating problems via the contract. And I think you're in a unique situation because yours isn't getting taken away, and it's not a bashing. It's how do we make it better than yours is for the next batch?
Honestly, I haven't had a chance to review any of the contract or anything. I'm fairly new in the position that I'm in. So I'm just kind of along for the ride, I guess you could say. And with our contract being like so far out, it hasn't really been something that I've looked at or, so I kind of feel a little unprepared for this.
Okay, no problem. No, we'll just do a pass on it because there's no requirements. This is more a good part of this meeting is educational for this committee, so we understand what's happening. So if things aren't working, we are undoubtedly going to enter into the next phase of this, assuming these don't go or things don't go right. So a little bit on occupancy and COVID and what it's done for you, just out of the blue, and your thoughts on tourism here in general.
It's been rough. I mean, I've been at the hotel, at the property throughout this entire pandemic without any, with trying to keep orders in line as far as when it originally hit, and the quarantining and the out-of-state people unless they're for work and whatnot. But since it had lightened up somewhat, before it just current spike, I mean, it's more or less seems like business as usual, so I'm just dealing with everyday hotel affairs, just trying to raise up the occupancy, obviously, but while staying within the guidelines of the Best Western and trying to, like I said before, keep the town safe and, travelers safe that come to stay with us. So, yeah.
Very good. Any questions, committee? Any questions in the back room, Mary Beth, excuse me. Okay, move on. Days In will be next. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Messenger, come on up and identify yourself. You can just step up and stand beside or 6 feet away.
Attorney. And he may not know the answer. The question I have is on his.
Go ahead and sit down, just everybody, because you're online, and it'd be nice for everybody.
Well, the question I have is under the Best Western current contract, do they lose the facility in 2043?
I think we'll have to ask Parks that. I really don't know. I've had the contract, but I haven't read it for a long time. Ms. Nayland, can you tell me?
Mr. Co-Chair, I'm checking on that.
Okay, we'll come with that.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
We'll give you the answer when it comes. Days In, want to come give a little bit of testimony?
Mr. Chairman.
And please explain kind of what your facility is and where it's at. I didn't do that on the last Best Western is in the old building, kind of across the street. And, okay. And then go ahead and start the days in.
Okay, my name is Bud Petrillo. I am the president of the Big Spring Spa, Inc., which is the corporation that owns and operates the Days Inn. I thought I'd start, just give you a little bit of background about who we are and what we've been and how we've been involved with Hot Springs State Park for over 40 years. We had a small investment group that formed the corporation in 1978, and we purchased what was then the Holiday Inn that probably most people around town know. The long history of the Holiday Inn in the park, and until recent years, it has changed in recent years to the Days Inn franchise, which is what we are now. Personally, I've gotten more involved in recent years, the last few years, in basically the managing partner of the corporation. Without being critical of old timers, our investment group is getting a little older. So we've been in a process since our lease expired and was not renewed. I think it's been 8 or 9 years now. Nick could probably know the exact date on that, but so there's been a lot of involvement in trying to get a new lease, a long-term lease, which has never come to fruition. There's been all kinds of complications. Without getting into a lot of detail in the history of it, we have had what I regard as a wonderful partnership with the state, and even more so in recent times with people in the legislature and state parks both. And I think that's been a vast improvement in dealing transparently and trying to work toward the future of the business, which is, to say the least, it's up in the air. We don't know where we're going from here. Most people probably know that there was a verbal agreement for the state parks to purchase our property this past year. It basically fell through because of COVID. Everything turned upside down. I think most businesses are in that same situation now. It's been a devastating time period for that 3 or 4 months where the hotel itself was not formally shut down, but the occupancy rate was, very, very low. Our restaurant and bar and hot tubs, pools, those were all mandated to be shut down during the lockdown. And that is pretty much what the appeal is of people coming into the park and staying at what we would regard as probably the premier concession in what people like to refer to as the crown jewel, as the #1 state park in Wyoming. So we've been a very significant part of that whole perception of coming into the state park. We've made lots of improvements recently, and the Safari Club has been kind of a pseudonym for our operation. If you've ever been to the hotel, it's basically a complete wildlife museum, which, although there's some controversy in today's climate about animal heads being displayed, but being in Wyoming and having tourism from around the country, the general consensus of anybody who's been involved over a long period of time has been that it has been a great appeal, and it's something that we would always strive to kind of keep in place, depending on what the future holds, which is undetermined at this point, which really gets us down to the basics of what we are up against as a business. We've been on a month-to-month basis with the state now for several years, with the inability to have come to a long-term lease agreement, which is the only way anybody with just good business acumen would ever get involved in a business like this. So the RFP that came out in January, Mr. Nayland mentioned that it's 45 pages long. I would classify that as kind of an outline. If everything involved in the RFP as it was presented and is now going to be represented pretty much exactly the same from what I understand. If you printed out everything, which we have done, that's involved as you go through each subsection, literally the stack of papers is like that, and I'm not exaggerating. And in there, it would take a long time to get into a lot of detail, but basically, when there was a lot of people involved in putting it together. Our involvement again with Nick and Julie and Senator Fiscal and Ager and Representative Winters has been excellent. But it doesn't preclude the fact that we are up against the wall in this whole situation. It's just basically an untenuous situation to have presented a proposal for our own concession after 42 years of ownership and success at that level. There was various entities involved in it. One of the companies called CHM out of the Boston area, and Margaret Bailey from that company, who's been involved on and off over the years with the state park and with the concessions. When we met with her prior to the RFP several months back, she actually literally told us that you would have to have a professional firm of some sort in order to present what would be an acceptable proposal in the RFP. At the time, I took that with a grain of salt, and since then I've been buried by the Morton Salt Company after we finally saw what the final product was. We were successful in negotiating a situation when it looked like nobody was going to be bidding on the RFP for our hotel. There was one possibility, but we didn't get to that point. So going forward, they extended the RFP temporarily for 90 days. And then when the whole COVID situation hit, everything is turned upside down. So we are now basically working under a management type of an agreement with the state until the end of the year. So that would fall within the parameters of the 90 days that Mr. Nayland mentioned after the RFP comes out again. Personally, I'll be amazed if anybody bids on it because of the one of the companies that this Margaret Bailey from CHM recommended in Denver, I've talked with, and one of the other concessionaires has worked with more closely, and that's their full-time business. And they had never seen something so long and complicated and basically unfair to a business operation. And along that same line, we put the business on the open market over a year ago for various reasons. One, to get an idea of what the market value was of the property, knowing that no one could actually purchase it until or if they could get a long-term lease in place. There was a lot of interest, and there still is. The unfortunate part is of all of we had an excellent realtor who listed the property, who specializes in hospitality in the whole Western State area. And he had all of his existing clientele who expressed a strong interest in purchasing the property. None of them chose to bid on the RFP after they looked at it. And I'm afraid we're going to be in that same situation when it comes out again, which leaves us in a quandary as to where do we go from there, assuming there's no successful bidder, which is in all probability what's going to happen. The business itself has been a wonderful venture. It's been a lifelong thing for me personally and for our investment group. You know, I could go on. We'd tell you some stories about when, you know, raising our 6 sons, where we spent our summers between Thermopolis and Jackson Hole, and the love of Wyoming and Thermopolis and the park and the business has just been outstanding venture. I wish I was younger where we could continue and really go on, but basically it's pretty well known by everybody involved that we are in a position where we want to sell the property. In my opinion, the state would be the ideal owner, which we had pretty much come to a full agreement all the way up through the line, the legislature and the state parks, until COVID hit. And it would solve all of the problems that the RFP presents. And as Mr. Nayland mentioned, having then a professional management company take over the operation, the business itself obviously has suffered immensely during this 3 to 4 month period. It has since then picked up surprisingly in the last few weeks. I mean, absolutely. We're getting back on track pretty well, and in no small reason with the hot springs being available again to people who are coming to visit. During the shutdown, we were fortunate to get PPP loan money through the SBA, handled by the banks, from the government program. That has been that's kept us afloat basically, and now we are getting involved in the new state relief grant program. We were successful in getting some funds in phase 1, and we plan to go on with phase 2, because our hope is if we can just break even during the cash flow months, which we are in now, we may even do a little better the way things are looking, and that's all good news. And then have built up a little bit of a war chest, taking us into the fall and winter months, where we typically operated a deficit for 8 months from October on to next spring again. The problem is we're right back to where we start. Talk about back to the future. We're in a very unknown situation going forward. And as I said, with all the discussions up the line, the state ownership, why I agree with the principle that the state probably should not get overly involved in private business. In a situation like this, probably similar to things that go on at Yellowstone, you get a good management company, and this business can do very well. Any purchase price that would be paid by the state for the hotel and the bar and the restaurant, which is all tied together, could be made up, in my opinion, in a pretty short period, because 2019 was a banner year for us. And January and February of 2020, we're following right along. And compared to our competitive set in the region, our rates were a little lower, the occupancy and the profitability, we were the best on the green sheets to come out on a monthly basis. And then of course, everything hit the fan. So we're right back to where we started. The RFP itself, is it's basically untenable from a practical business standpoint. If we were to agree to a lot of the things that the state would want in this 2-inch thick document, you would really be at risk to lose the business at almost any given time for almost any given reason. So we could agree to a lot of that and put in a proposal specifying all of those restrictions and parameters that are in it. But we'd be in the same position then trying to sell it to an outside entity that come in as the new concessionaire. Nobody, in my opinion, would be willing to buy it under those circumstances for the same reasons none of them who were very interested in the property would bid on the RFP. So we're really in a catch-22 situation. And I could go on and on, but I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what we're dealing with. And I don't have a good answer. We'll see what happens after the RFP comes out. And assuming that I'm correct, that there will not be a successful bidder, we're then in a position, and we've had some discussions with state parks, that we could then kind of relook at the whole situation, maybe deal with it in a more abbreviated form, similar to the management agreement that we have signed to continue the business and operating it to the end of the year, which would make a lot more sense from not just a practical business standpoint, but from a realistic standpoint. And my own opinion is that there are too many fingers got in the pot in putting the RFP together, outside agencies and state parks people themselves have done yeoman work. I mean, I have nothing but the highest regard and respect for Nick and Julie and Director Westby for what they've done. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us a good option or outlook at the current time. One of the items that was brought up previously about at the end of it, whatever a particular contract for a lease is, that the business would be then revert to the state. I can't even imagine a scenario where anybody willing to invest a lot of money into a business like this would agree to just walk away. I don't care how long it is, 5 years, 30 years. It's not a good business decision, and I don't believe we're going to find anybody who's going to agree to that to begin with. So I guess the bottom line is the future is uncertain at this point. Hopefully there will be no more shutdowns because of COVID as it expands, which would be disastrous for everybody. I know the state is in the same situation we are as independent business people. It's just an unknown situation. I don't even know how someone could bid on an RFP and make commitments financially, not just in the purchase of the business, but of the renovation work, upkeep and so forth, having no idea what the future holds, especially under the extreme circumstances that we find ourselves because of, I'm going to go out on a limb and call it the Chinese virus. God help me for blaming China for this, but China's flourishing and we're struggling as a country economy, but I won't get into the political side of all that. Anyway, I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have about it, but I think that's a kind of a thumbnail sketch of where we are and where we hope to go.
Thank you. Very important. Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your contract, is it a percentage, based on percentage? Is it a flat rate rent? And how often do you pay that? And then is there some sort of investment criteria? I know we referred to Yellowstone and like Centerra has to make so much investment in the property. Is there anything like that in your contract?
Well, we're really not under a contract right now. We're under a management agreement. But the previous lease that we had for decades called for various upgrades as they were needed, basically just to run the business properly and more of a common sense approach. The fee that we paid the state has been an advantage to us from a cost standpoint, and a disadvantage of the state being on a month-to-month basis. So there's no question that it would be a much better situation where a percentage of gross revenue, which is what the other concessions that have long-term leases now are paying a specific percentage of their annual gross revenue. We were limited to, and still are on a month-to-month basis, to a specific dollar amount. And it's paid on, it's an annualized fee paid on a monthly basis, prorated monthly.
Follow up. Questions, Senator Manise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. Do you own the property?
Senator Manise, I believe.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, we're good.
Do they own the property, Days Inn? Do they own that property or are they leasing?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
So if you own the property.
Do we own, you're talking about the land?
The Days Inn itself or the land?
Well, the land is obviously in the state park. That's what this is all about. We are on state land property. We own the business, but we are still under, pretty stringent restrictions from the state as to how to maintain the business. And I think anybody who has been involved in the last few years has seen that we have maintained and upgraded the property a lot. I got quick thumbnails. I got the, if you're aware of the two massive hailstorms from last summer, the destruction that was amazing in Thermopolis alone and other areas in the region. We ended up with the help of our insurance company, who has been excellent in installing an entire new roof on the entire property, both the shingled areas and the flat roofs, about 50,000 square feet, as well as all of the HVAC units, many of which were heavily damaged by the hailstorm. So there's been just those items alone represent about $500,000 in improvements. Since that were not included in anything in the RFP. In other words, there was a formal appraisal done on the property by an outside firm, which would require a new concessionaire to pay us to buy our business. Since then, we've spent, there's been over $500,000 spent in upgrades, which would not just improve the appraised value, but it would decrease what a new owner would have to spend to come up to the par that the state would be looking for. In fact, right now we're in the middle of spending tens of thousands of dollars on upgraded computer systems, cable systems, and Wi-Fi systems. About 2/3 of that is already completed, and we're in the middle of doing other things that are going to be, they just not only have to be done, should be done. And as I said, I wish we were in a position to just continue for the long term, but it is time for something new to happen. And to reiterate, I think all of these problems that are preventing an outside bidder to really come in legitimately, someone who's qualified, would disappear if the state took over the business. And again, hire an outside management firm. And I've actually, when we were at that point of an imminent sale to the state, I had agreed to stay on as kind of oversee manager for whatever interim period would be needed to make sure that it was still running profitably. We have an excellent management team there, and to help make sure everybody stays in place. And the state, the profit of that business to the state, assuming we get back to normal, whatever that's going to be, whatever that looks like. If we get back to where we were in 2019, it could be a very profitable situation for any new concessionaire. But the restrictions are preventing that from happening right now.
Thank you. Follow-up question?
as far as the question about do we own the business or the land?
And I can answer that, I think, for you, where I'm sitting, so I'm getting feedback. The ground under all these concessions is owned by Hot Springs State Park, State of Wyoming. All the improvements above the ground are owned by the concessionaires at this point in time, at least for the 4. If that's wrong, somebody correct me. So, further questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Beniz.
I thought that would be the answer, but what happens if you don't sign your management agreement by the end of the year?
We couldn't hear you one more time.
What happens if you don't sign your management agreement by the end of the year?
It's not an, I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, you want to answer that? Mr. Co-Chair, we hope to have the RFP process completed and in place by the end of the year. If we do not, we would approach the existing concessionaires to enter into a new management agreement.
So if no one bids at all on them, they take a chance, nobody bids on them, then they go to looking at a new contract 5 years or more.
Mr. Co-Chair, we would look at a short-term management agreement to tide us over until we can decide the correct path forward.
Thank you.
No.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe this is more a question for, are the percentages paid different for each property? Or is it kind of flat, we pay 5% or 3% or whatever?
Ms. Co-Chair Representative, I believe that the Days Inn pays us a flat fee of $9,000 a year to operate their facility. The contracts with the Best Western and the TP, I believe this is true. I haven't looked at the contracts recently, but I think they call for them to take 3%. Half of that, 1/2% goes to us as the lease payment, and 2.5% they are then required to invest back into their facility. So the state makes 0.5% on both of those leases per year.
My understanding is that there was going to be the request from the state would be like a 5% annual fee of gross revenue, which is a much more substantial number, obviously. I assumed that the other two long-term leases in place, I thought they were under that same.
Mr. Co-Chair Representative, I think that the amount, the percentage that shows up in the new contract for the new concessionaire, whoever runs those facilities, will be dependent upon what they put in their RFP. So it's up to the concessionaire, who's ever doing the RFP, to propose that amount to us, as well as the length of the contract. And my apologies to Roland and the Stark Lunch. I don't know off the top of my head the fee that they pay us every year.
But I will add that in the RFP itself, there is a strong indication that the state would be looking for, in all probability, a 5%. They would hope a bidder would be looking to pay a 5% of gross annual revenue.
Representative Tass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, it sounds to me like this contract is more of a deal to freeze out the concessionaire. I think we're moving on to a real dangerous precedent. The state is supposed to buy with taxpayer dollars these properties. We move into the Occidental property. The state's trying to buy. We're talking about state request to build facilities at the state fairgrounds in Douglas to compete with Casper and Gillette, all with taxpayer dollars. I think the state's going in the wrong direction. We need to help these concessionaires stay in business without the state owning all of these different properties. it's really easy to own private businesses with taxpayers' money. And I think we're headed the wrong direction using these kind of things to freeze these people out of their businesses that they own here. We need to figure out a way, and I don't have the answer, but to allow them to stay in business, trade the businesses, and keep them in business and still improve the facilities on the state property. State should not own these properties, any of them. So, thank you.
Couldn't agree more.
Questions, committee? Questions? Thank you, Mr. Petrello.
Thank you.
We show the DP or the star next.
I think it was the star next.
Okay, I think we'll go to the star next, and I think we have Taylor. Al, come on up. We've got both. We got Roland here. Taylor's on listening to you apparently then. Welcome, Roland. I think most of the committee knows you anyway.
Yes, hi, everybody. Good to see you too.
Were you listening enough to catch kind of the rules how we set this out?
Yes.
So you've got 15 minutes and you just do what you want.
Okay.
So I'll turn you loose if you heard the.
Okay, I want to start my story by in 1980.
Introduce yourself and your business because you're on YouTube on this.
Okay, sorry. My name is Roland Lonnie. I'm the owner of Star Plunge. In 1972, my folks traveled up here on vacation. They were lost when they got here. They pulled into the Hot Springs State Park around 10 o'clock at night, and they seen the lights on at the Star Plunge. So my father went up and talked to some of the guys at the Star Plunge and asked them what they were doing. And they said, well, we're cleaning our outside pool. It was completely dry. Lights were on, draining the pool. My father said, well, what is this? They said, well, this is a hot springs. This is a hot springs called Star Plunge. And my father said, wow, we've never been to one. So my father asked them, well, where could we stay? They had a little camper trailer. Mom, dad, 5 kids, one small camper trailer. And they said, well, the state park has a free campground just between the railroad tracks and the river. And my father's like, oh my gosh, I'm in heaven, free campground. So my folks went over to the free campground, and the following day we all went swimming. We all fell in love with Star Plunge. I mean, a warm pool, it was amazing. So we returned the following year in 1973, and my father learned that it was for sale, Star Plunge. And so he was excited. He wanted to buy the pool. So in 1975, my father, my mother, and 5 kids packed up from Denver and purchased the Star Plunge. The very first year that my father had the pool, he started making massive improvements that he could do, like putting a new roof on the indoor pool, building a steam room and a new hot tub. When my folks built the new cover for our indoor pool, it changed the whole, I'm gonna say all of Thermopolis, because he turned Thermopolis into a year-round destination for people to come to. Because at the time, there were no indoor pools, no indoor swimming, and nothing to attract people to Thermopolis in the wintertime. The teepee had been burnt down in, I think, 1973 and didn't get rebuilt till 77. So anyway, so my father and mother worked very hard, and they had a full staff with 5 kids. My 2 brothers were lifeguards, and I ran the old Screamy Mimi. I don't know if you guys know what that was, but I ran the Screamy Mimi. And my mom and sisters ran the snack bar. My father ran the front counter as well as doing all the maintenance. So we started putting along, and it was mom and dad, 5 kids living in a trailer house for 5 years. So in 1982, my folks built the big slide outside, and that changed all of Thermopolis. And I want to say it changed a lot of tourism in the area, because we had the first water slide in Wyoming. It was the 3rd largest of its kind ever built. So business started to improve. My folks worked every day at the pool, every day, cooking, maintenance, cleaning, always doing something. And the thing with the pool is that it's an endless job of doing maintenance. I mean, you take 2 steps forward, you have to take 1 step back, because you have to go back and continue to to fix. And it's because of the harsh environment of the water. So as time passed, 1982, got the big slide, things are going good. Our income at the pool had increased. Every year, the pool's income would increase. And you could see it by what we'd pay the state. So in 1987, we built our new hydro tube slide. And the idea about the hydro tube slide was to have an indoor slide during the winter time, which helped not only us, but helped Thermopolis. It brought people in during the winter time when there's nothing else to do. 1989, we built the Little Dipper slide. It's a little slide outside. It's probably the most popular slide. Little kids love that little slide. Kids just love that slide. So in I think it was 1995, we had to tear off the roof of our indoor pool and put a new roof on. The roof that was on there wasn't even 20 years old, but with the harsh environment, the materials that were used just wasn't enough to survive. So the indoor pool roof was redone. And whenever we redo something at the pool, we usually make it better, use better material, more technology, more information to what's going to last and what's going to work for the pool. And so time moves on. We continue to maintain and improve our facility a little at a time. New deck around the outside pool was done in the late 90s, and a deck on the inside pool. We're always resurfacing areas in the facility because of the harsh environment. So as time passed, the family kind of broke up. Not only did we, like some of us, leave the pool, but some of them left the state. So I continued working at the pool from 1975 until to this day. It's 45 going on 46 years I've worked there. And in 2012 was the year I was able to purchase the Star Plunge. Then it was my baby from that point forward. And having one owner like myself, most of the time you don't have to ask, the board members if you can do something or buy something. So like in 2012, I got to have the reins and run the pool the way I wanted. And since 2012, we continued to do what my folks wanted to do, which was to continue to make our facility better and reinvest into our facility. And we've done that. We've every year we put money back into our pool. We try to make it better. And so you say, like, well, how do you know you're doing better? I know we're doing better because how much money we're making. We're making more money this last year than we ever have before. And it's because people are returning. They love our facility. Our facility is not Bally's or Caesar's Palace, but it's Star Plunge. It's old. Nothing in the building is square. But that's why people like it. It's not like the water park in Casper or the water park in Portland. It's very unique. Certain things at the pool, I agree. We need to fix them, and I want to, and I would like to grow. I always have. Our facility is kind of landlocked, but if we want to attract more people to Thermopolis, I think we could do it if we can just work together. That's what I want to work with the state. I want to get larger. I'd like to reinvest. But as you know, our lease has expired. It's been gone for over 10 years. And I've always had faith that we'd get a lease, but we've just had no luck. I would be happy with the lease, whatever the TP pools have. Whatever they have, I'd like to have the same thing to make it fair. So last year, we have news that the state is going to release an RFP, a proposal for my land and my property, my business, my family business. And so I said, well, we got to do it. I talked to this Margaret lady, the creator of the RFP. She's from Boston. And I'm sure for her to put this RFP together cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to just put this thing so I can bid on my own facility. So the RFP started December 1st, which was a Sunday after Thanksgiving. And it right at the start said, if you're gonna propose for your facility, your own facility, mandatory walk through the facilities. So I was the only one there. Me and my team were the only people there. So it starts and they say, you got 45 days. And so we started. To do an RFP, it takes lawyers, architects, engineers, artists. It takes a team, management team, and I'm in $100,000 right now. That's what I'm in. And so January 17th rolls around and they say, well, let's do the 17th. You better dot your I's, have it in. So my team's working Christmas, New Year's, everything. It's tough. It's a big RFP. They say it's unbelievable for such a small property. And so we work through it and we're going to get it done by the 17th. So here comes the state, or the parks. Well, we're going to give you 45 more days. Sounds good in a way, but it doesn't stop the clock from ticking on what we pay. So now it's March 17th and we continue to work. And like I said, $100,000. That's what I'm in right now. That's paying and buying stuff to be ready for this RFP. 100,000. That's with lawyer fees, hotel rooms, traveling, quite a bit. And I had to hire a firm down in Colorado that knows about properly. And so it's been a nightmare. It's horrible. And if you read the RFP, it's exactly what you guys have been bringing up. It says you're going to invest, and when you're done, it's ours. We don't care. It's ours. It belongs to Parks and Recreation. No compensation. Zero. I don't have a choice. I must do this. I have no choice. So that's where we're at. As far as other things at the pool that's always been in question was my folks were not fancy people. They would do cash and check, and then we started doing purchase orders for schools and stuff. They never took credit card. So in 2008, we put in an ATM 12 years ago. It's the first time we had any kind of credit card at the pool. And the ATM did really well because we didn't take credit cards at the desk. So ATM's making money. ATM's making money. It's pulling in about $15,000 a year on an ATM. That's good money. You know, people come in, if they didn't have an ATM card, we say, hey, don't worry about it. Here's an envelope. We put a stamp on it. We put the address on it. Said, you know, when you get home, send us a check. Somehow, some way, no matter what, if people would show up at the pool without cash and all they had is a credit card and not ATM, they would get in swimming. And we've never been skunked by using the ATM that we always had. But we had people complaining, people saying, hey, you guys are stealing, Roland. You're skimming off the top. Don't need to. We don't need to. We don't need to skim off the top. We're probably more worried about the government than anything. So we went to credit cards. And it's a good thing. But the thing with that is that the $15,000 that I was making from the ATM, we're paying the credit cards now. So it's kind of a flip. You lose the 15 and now you're paying 15. So you dig a hole of $30,000. But we do it to make people happy. Other things that happen, I've had people just say some of the stupid stuff to me. They said, Roland, you and your fancy house up there that I built are stealing water from the state park. You're stealing water. I said, no, we're not. We're pumping water up because we have a permit. We heat our house and we put it right back down in the ground. It's a win-win. It's very green. And to tell you the truth, I would never do anything to hurt my pool. Nothing. And I think that's it. That's my story. The RFP is horrible. Horrible. Nobody could do that. I mean, no single man could do that RFP. And like I said, I'm 100,000 in.
Thank you. Good story. Questions for the committee? Chairman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roland, you mentioned that you went through this process with the previous over a year ago, and you spend all this money to get experts to help you put together your package. But did you not end up submitting a package?
No, they weren't taking it. They said it's been postponed. It's been postponed.
So it's just been shut down. Okay. So the package you were working on, what were you going to submit a bid that helped you, or one of the caveats was that you retained ownership of the facility, or were you going to not even go there?
Oh, well, it's my family business. I don't have a choice. I want to stay. I've always wanted to stay.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at what we do at the pool, I hope you'll understand that we love our facility. We make more money every year, and it's because people appreciate what we're doing. I have people telling me, Roland, you only pay $7,000 a year, a little over $500 a month to be there. And that's cheap. I agree that's cheap. That agreement was made in 1953. 1953, they said, you pay 1% Star Plunge. You pay 1%. And right now, I've told a lot of people, I've told some representatives and senators, I said, you can charge me whatever you want. I don't care. I'm not the one paying it. It's the families that come to Thermopolis that go to the pool and pay $12.50 or $6. Okay, it sounds like a lot of money, but $12.50, that rate started in 2012. Okay, I think it's a fair price. Glenwood Springs charges $27.50 last year, and every time you want to use a slide, it's $1. It's $1. So if you want to charge me more, I have no problem paying a fair rate, whatever, what the TP's paying. I'm happy to pay 2%, which is the same rate, I believe, that when people come to the park and do the craft fair or sell something, I think they're supposed to pay 2%. I'm happy to pay that, because if I pay more, it's just going to pass on to the people that come into my facility, the families. And the thing with the Star Plunge is that it's $12.50 for me, and the people that come to the pool, they stay a couple hours or more. When they stay a couple hours at my facility, they're going to go get something to eat. They're going to go get a hotel room, a camping spot, groceries, hardware. The money goes all around our community. And right now, I believe that the newspaper put out a fact that the tourism in the area was $27 million. That's what is made through the hotels and the swimming pools and the hotels and swimming pools. And a large part of that is from, I would like to think, Star Plunge, because we did 70,000 swims last year. 70,000 people came in and took a swim. A lot of season ticket holders or multiple swims, but a lot of people from out of town. Okay. And that $27 million that is collected through hotels and pools, and it turns over in our community a lot, 7 times maybe. That's over $100 million. And that's where the state can make most of their revenue, not off of Star Plunge. I mean, we're glad to pay. We're happy to pay. But I hope that it's fair. If we do the RFP, you're passing off a big bill to the next person, because I don't think it's going to be me. If somebody else puts in a bid for Star Plunge against me, I don't think I have a chance. We've been trying for a lease for a long time, and we don't have a chance if somebody else puts in. So if they do put in, they're going to be in. I mean, it's going to be scary, because to run the Star Plunge, it's very tricky. There's a lot to it. There's so much to it. And the new owner is going to come in, and he's going to be in millions of dollars, millions, okay? He's going to want a return, okay? So if he wants that return for his investment, let's say $3 to $4 million, let's say $4 million, because he's going to really do a good job. He's going to need to make at least $40,000 a month to service the debt just on that money. The Star Plunge's greatest year ever was a little over $700,000 last year, okay? And a lot of it is, I would say at least 40% of that money or more comes from in-state people coming to Star Plunge. People from Casper, people from all over the state, they come to Star Plunge. It doesn't get old to them because they only come in 2 or 3 times a year. And what I say by that is that kids in town will get a new video game at the Star Plunge, brand new game, $5,000. It goes like crazy for about 2 weeks. All the kids in town got to play the game, 2 weeks, and then it just dies. It dies because they get tired of it. But the games I have at my facility continue to get played because people from Casper come. They see it once or twice a year. People from Warland, they come around. It doesn't get old, just kind of like Disneyland. Most of the stuff at Disneyland, it doesn't get old. I mean, it's the same ride that's been there forever. But people love that ride because it was there when they were a kid. Or high jump at the pool. It's been there since like 1953. It's a little shorter than it used to be, but it's there. And it's the only high jump in the whole state. But it's what people come here for. They don't, I mean, you put in that big facility or fancy park or whatever, it'll be good for a couple months. But I mean, we only have a couple months of summer. So.
Question from the committee. Questions from the committee. Thank you. I think we're
pretty well through that. I guess my question was, were you offered a lease at the same time as the TP and the Days Inn? Were you not offered one then?
Well, we've been trying for a lease since Friedenthal was a governor. Before it expired, we're trying to get a lease with Friedenthal, and Friedenthal told Millward Simpson, he goes, yeah, I want you to get this done before December, before he got out of office. No, just drug the feet, no way. I mean, I truly want a better facility. If you look at the 2 facilities, TP Pools, Star Plunge. The TP Pools is a fantastic place. It's a good place. People go there. It attracts people from everywhere. TP does a good job. We do a good job too, but we attract a lot more people. And you know that by how much money we pay for our lease.
Do you feel like you have an option on the RFP, whether you fill one out or not?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
You feel like you have an option on the RFP, whether you fill one out or not?
I think I can fill one out. It doesn't mean they're going to accept it. That they have the option to just, well, sorry, it's not what we're looking for. It's their opinion.
And one last, keep it fairly short. What was your consultant's thoughts when they looked at the RFP? What did they tell you as far as it being feasible and workable or not?
They said it was just as complicated or worse than what Centerra goes through when they bid on Yellowstone or Grand Teton or Yosemite, because there's state parks, everywhere for national parks, and they were like, they couldn't believe it. How could they give that to like me, and say, oh, here, it's easy to do. Oh no, you can ask Bud. But he got pretty worried there, I think. I mean, he made some phone calls, I think you know about, and it's horrible. I don't think it's fair. And who's gonna they might win the RFP. They're going to do the bare minimum, and they're going to keep every dime they can. They're not going to put that extra money back in. They're not going to put flowers in like I put in. They're not going to do a lot of little things that bring people back.
Any further questions from the committee? I don't think we have any behind, so we have one last, if we've got anybody from the TP here to present. I don't think we did.
Mr. Chairman.
And I was going to do one last. It's okay. What do we have? I'm not seeing. So I'm blind. Who's there?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mary Beth.
Yeah, unless Sarah James, are you saying? Oh, Mary Beth. Okay. Sorry. I can't see. All I see is a canned picture. Do you have somebody for us, Mary Beth?
No, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to let you know that Mr. Moriarty is following along with the YouTube, and additionally, later on, probably in our next, he would provide comments.
One more time.
I believe Mr. Moriarty is following along on the YouTube, and isn't going to be providing public comment at this time.
Very good.
Thank you. We have hiring you to, but I know you've represented and you can either come as
come up as an individual if you'd like, or represent people, but I'm going to give you a chance to have a say if you want it, and if you don't, just say no. But I think you know more about the history probably than about anybody here. Am I putting you on the spot? And I apologize if I am.
No, you're not.
Please
identify yourself, give your history, and then we'll let you take 10 minutes.
Well, my name's Michael Messenger. I'm an attorney and I've been in Thermopolis since 1975. I have represented the Star Plunge since 1975. They were my first clients, and I reviewed their contract to purchase the facility. Now, I have appeared and spoke many times over the last 10 years, and prior to the 10 years, with my clients, whether it's the Star Plunge or the Days Inn, which was the Holiday Inn, to Cheyenne, and met many times with whichever agency at the time was in control of the state parks. And we worked through a lot of issues over that time. But to be specific with regard to the Star Plunge first, you know, the appraisal that the state wanted did not include any of the hard assets of the Star Plunge. There's a cash flow appraisal basically only. The appraiser said, I don't know how to appraise swimming pools and the facility there. So we have a very small appraisal compared to the Days Inn, which was easier, I guess, to appraise as a hotel motel. So I had an independent look at his report, and she is an attorney. She is a CPA. She's a certified business appraiser, and she tore that up one side and down the other as a very unfair negative comment about them. What it is a very unworkable situation. Now, I'm not going to pontificate as I have in the past, but I have questions. Number one, why does the state want to own private enterprise? Why do they want to own these facilities and then lease them out for management? What's in it for the state? Do you think that any management company would do what Roland Lonnie's family has done if all they had to gain out of a management agreement was whatever income they could, whatever net income they could make? Or would they piddle along with their management agreement? You've all been in some aspect of private enterprise. Those of you here, those of you on the video. And you know what's most successful is the person who has a stake in it, as opposed to those who don't have a stake in that particular business. Of course, it's private enterprise. If that's not in Wyoming's Constitution, it's the way Wyoming operates. Private enterprise is right up there with various other rights we have, whether emboldened or not in the Constitution. I want to know for the Best Western and Teepee, under their current contracts, do they lose the facility at the end of the term? These contracts aren't that old. suddenly we have this new proposal coming from around the nation, not Wyoming. I want to know too, when this started, there were 4 concessionaires, these 2 that we're talking about here today and 2 others who did not have leases. They were on month to month apparently. I would like to know if the state park or the system, the agency, held those other 2 to the same request for proposal. And I don't know if they were a marina or just managed a park or what they did. I want to know if they submitted their RFPs or if they're being held the same standard that these 2 are being held, and if they will lose their facilities at the end of whatever their lease is. I also want to know why Wyoming would countenance and approve a micromanaging business relationship that is contained within the RFP, contained in the current management agreement, contained in prior proposals they made for leases that ran contrary to good business sense. Why do they need to micromanage with a 20 or 30 page lease, whatever it happens to be, or management agreement, however long that happens to be? Why do they feel they need to micromanage every aspect? Now, the agency will tell you that, well, but we're going to get along, we're going to treat you fairly, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, if any of you have dealt with any state or federal agency, you know there's a turnover in people. So what people say today, not in writing, that we want to work together, we want to be a partnership, we want to be a team, and we want to work with each other, may change as people move on in the bureaucracy, get promoted within the bureaucracy, retire from the bureaucracy. New people come in, they read that language, they have maybe they're in very good faith, but they believe they need to toe the line with all of that micromanaging language. So I ask if that was really the intent of the committee, if that was really the intent of the legislature when they passed the law that Senator Driscoll carried, and the purpose of that, you know, wanting to get these leases done. That was right, appropriate to do, because we weren't making any headway. And so a legislation that says you will get this done by December 2019, and you will get regulations, rules and regulations. I don't know if any of you read those. I don't know if any of you have read the RFP and the addendums to the RFP. The RFP is just one part of it. There's all the things you have to do if the RFP is accepted. And I don't mean making new investments. I mean what I talked about, the micromanagement and all these things. So I want to know if the committee believes that was really the intent of the legislature. And if it was, don't we have a right to know why the state wants to do this? Now, I can speak for Roland. He didn't mention it, but he wants to turn this over to Taylor. Taylor is his daughter. She's working there. She's on now. And when Roland's ready to retire, he wants to turn it over to her. Well, what incentive does she have to work for the state? She can't turn it over to her family because the lease will terminate, and it'll be owned by the state under this particular set of circumstances. So I don't know what you can do about it right now. The legislature's not in session, and you know, these deadlines that will be imposed will be before the next session where you can address this. But this is not Wyoming's way. From my perspective, I was raised in Cody. I went to undergraduate school. I went to Vietnam. I came back, went to law school, and moved to Thermopolis. It was just far enough from the in-laws and outlaws. Okay? And we established our own lives here. So I think those are significant questions that need to be answered. And whether you can answer them, whether Mr. Nayland can answer them, I mean, no disrespect to any member of the bureaucracy in that regard. I have not been treated very reasonable by the Attorney General's office when I have tried to contact and I tried to reinstitute lease negotiations for the 2017 lease offer. And I get a blunt, that's off the table. We're not going to talk about a lease anymore. Okay. And then of course, all this RFP comes down. And there's one of the reasons for all the delay apparently was when we couldn't in the early, 2010, 2011 timeframe, continue to negotiate. And we had this big hiatus was because the state wanted to do all of its master planning. And they left this part for last. So that's why we've been on a month-to-month lease ever since. And I don't know, what did it take? It took Roland 9 months to get approval for a new hot tub outside. 9 months.
9 years.
Or 9 years.
9 years, and then after we built it, it took another 9 months.
To get approval. Now, they know how to build a hot tub, and they know how to plumb it, and they know how to do everything. But they were required to pay a couple of $1,000s to an engineer to design what they designed, put a stamp of approval on it, and submit it that way. $2,500 is the limit of improvements without an engineer's certificate on the approval. It's pretty hard to build anything anymore for $2,500. Now, maybe that's going to change to $5,000, but it's still the process. It still takes away the incentive. And Mr. Chairman, if I seem too adversarial, I don't mean to be.
You're not.
But I think these are the hard questions that haven't been asked. By the way, I'm precluded from, the Attorney General's office told me, do not contact the agency anymore. So I have no right to ask for information from the agency. I have no right to call up and clarify something or talk to somebody about anything. And under the professional guidelines we have as attorneys, we don't want attorneys talking to other attorneys' clients. But I'm just telling you that that's a barrier. And I don't know what happens. It takes a minimum of 2 months to get any response out of the Attorney General's office when I make an inquiry. Because it goes up the chain of command, I guess, or something. So it's just frustrating when we're trying to move ahead. We're in private enterprise, private business. We want to get something done and we can't. It'll just make it worse. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, co-chairman, and representatives and senators. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Messinger? Seeing none, we will take off for lunch till 1:30 and we'll bring Parks back up at 1:30 and kind of do a follow-up of what we've just gone through and further discussion on what we've got on the green sheet handed out. Co-Chairman Miller.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would like Parks to address that question, whether TP and Best Western properties revert back to state ownership after the term of their lease. I don't think we've got an answer to that. Okay, they don't.
I'm not going to say it because I can't remember. I'm pretty positive they do not. Mr. Co-Chair, I checked in the lease for the Best Western. According to that lease, that facility does revert back to the state. TP does not. And why the difference? I cannot answer that question. I was not part of the negotiations for either of those. But there is one of them does, one of them doesn't.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see everybody back at 1:30.